Daenerys Targaryen stood on the wind-scoured balcony of the great mansion Pentos, her silver-gold hair whipping about her face, and thought about the shape of her destiny. The city stretched out before her in a tapestry of dusty reds, yellowed domes, and winding streets. From her vantage point, she could see the crumbling elegance of old villas and the bustle of harbor traffic. Dozens of ships with tall masts bobbed in the bay, sails turning into the faint pinkish hues of the late afternoon light. Over them, gulls wheeled and screeched, drawn by the promise of scraps. But Daenerys saw only the sea, the rolling expanse that reached westward. Beyond it lay the land she had never visited but had always dreamed of: Westeros, the Seven Kingdoms. Her rightful inheritance, if only she had the courage to seize it. Illyrio Mopatis had offered his usual compliments that morning, praising her beauty, praising the magnetism of her name, Targaryen, a name that still held power across the narrow sea. But Daenerys had gently cut him off. Her patience was wearing thin, and each day she spent behind walls that were not her own, in lands that would never embrace her, made her long for that crossing. The day was coming when she would sail west, and each time she imagined it, she felt her blood quicken. She was the last Targaryen, the mother of dragons, and she had a destiny that no mere merchant prince could stifle. In the dim corridors inside, her 3 dragons were becoming restless. Drogon, the largest and fiercest, had taken to spitting small jets of flame whenever his siblings approached him too closely. Rhaegal and Viserion, smaller but no less fearsome in their own right, chased each other through the manse's courtyard in swirling shadows, wings beating against the night air. Servants ran in a panic whenever they escaped their chain-bound perches. Daenerys knew they were still young, still growing, but her heart told her that if she waited for them to mature fully, she might lose her advantage. The dragon's power was her advantage, and her claim to the Iron Throne was much stronger than she had believed in the early days of her life as a frightened princess. She would not let them waste away in captivity while she worried about the plots of men who claimed to be her benefactors. It was time to move. Ser Jorah Mormont, ever at her side, had grown more insistent. "Your Grace," he said, "we cannot linger. The realm has not healed from its wars. The usurper's family is vulnerable. If you strike soon, earlier than anyone could foresee, you may well win the realm without letting them unify to stop you." His grizzled voice held both caution and optimism. His eyes, which once belonged to a disgraced knight, now gleamed with devotion. She nodded. "Westeros has suffered through war, perhaps too many wars. But they do not know me, Jorah. They have heard only rumors of the Dragon Queen across the sea. They have made me into a story. Perhaps it is time I proved that I am more than whispers." Illyrio, that sly merchant of secrets, was not convinced by pure optimism. He had tested her determination in subtle ways. He introduced her to Sel's word captains, emissaries from Volantis, cunning men who weighed her cause against the gold they might earn. When she refused to dither over alliances with those who did not share her vision, Illyrio merely smiled and changed the subject. She suspected he wanted her to wait while he maneuvered behind the scenes, forging new compacts, new deals, always in search of further profit. But she would not be a prize to be bartered. If she was to take the Iron Throne, it would be on her own terms. That night, she gathered her closest confidants in the largest receiving room of Illyrio's manse. Stone braziers spat firelight across the polished marble floor, sending dancing shadows along high-arched walls. Ser Jorah stood to her left, and beside him was Missandei, who had traveled with Daenerys from the slave cities, her unwavering loyalty and clear-eyed counsel an anchor in turbulent times. Barristan Selmy, still going by Ars and Whitebeard in many conversations to preserve a vestige of secrecy, stayed near the edges of the room. Daenerys's gaze also passed over the unsullied captain, Grey Worm, who stood stiff and silent. She watched them all with a measured calm she had learned since her earliest days of captivity under Viserys' thumb. "I am sailing for Westeros," she announced. "Sooner rather than later. I know you have concerns, especially you, my old friend." She inclined her head toward Jorah, "but the time for fear has passed. We cannot wait for a perfect moment, because perfection does not exist. The city of Pentos may provide refuge, but it cannot fulfill my birthright. I must be the one to end the Lannisters' hold on the throne and restore Targaryen rule." Her voice did not waver. Her eyes glowed with a quiet, determined fire. She saw Missandei's small smile, the way her dark eyes sparkled with admiration. Ser Jorah bowed his head, not in surrender but in acknowledgement of the will that flared before him. Barristan Selmy stepped from the shadows, hands clasped in front of him. "Your Grace, it is wise to strike when your enemies are in disarray. There is talk of the North Sea seceding and the Iron Islands in revolt. The realm is divided. If you arrive as a unifying force, with dragons at your command, many will flock to you. Yet Daenerys knew well that Westeros was a land of cunning lords, each with their own ambition. She could not arrive empty-handed, nor could she rely solely on the mystique of her name. She would bring an army, her unsullied, the loyal men freed from slavery and devoted to her cause. She would bring her dragons, still small, but formidable enough to break the will of men. And she would bring herself, Daenerys Stormborn, a queen unafraid of the fires of adversity. Illyrio, swathed in voluminous silks and jingling rings, soon learned of her decision and tried to dissuade her with gold, with fleeting gifts. She refused them all. She had watched her dragons circle overhead that morning, keening in the sky. They were becoming impatient for flight, and so was she. Within the week, Daenerys had secured passage on a trio of merchant galleys and a handful of Pentoshi ships. Illyrio had offered ships with enough space to carry her forces and all the supplies they needed to make a swift crossing. She held no illusions that the crossing would be free of peril. The seas were unpredictable, and though the merchant ships were stout, they might still founder in storms. But her course was set. Each moment she delayed might invite more enemies to conspire against her. When she finally boarded the largest galley, flanked by Yora and Grey Worm, the Pentoshi harbor teemed with curious onlookers. Some cheered at the sight of the dragons overhead, swirling shadows against the bright sky. Others cursed the Targaryen name, spitting on the ground, remembering the old tales of the Mad King. Still, Daenerys's gaze never wavered. She was no longer the timid girl who had been sold to Khal Drogo. She was a queen. The ships set sail, turning their bows toward the horizon. The morning sun refracted on the water, turning the crests of waves to molten silver. Daenerys stood at the prow, the sea breeze on her face, a gentle mist clinging to her cheeks. She held Drogon close in the early hours, letting him climb onto her shoulder. His weight was greater than before, but she bore it proudly. Viserion and Regal circled overhead, occasionally alighting on the rigging. The ship's captain, an old Pentoshi with wispy hair, watched the dragons with eyes full of alarm and reverence. Days passed in a strangely peaceful blur of wind and waves. The skies remained mostly clear, though the nights grew chilly. Daenerys could feel tension coiled in her belly, a readiness for the challenges ahead. Yora came to her daily, reporting news gleaned from passing ships, rumors of conflict in King's Landing, talk of unrest in the Riverlands, whispers that House Stark had been nearly destroyed but that the North was not entirely subdued. She also heard of the Lannisters' hold on power growing tenuous, with many questioning young King Tommen's legitimacy or else fearing the rumors about the boy's parentage. Daenerys' own name, it was said, was invoked in hushed tones. Some considered her a savior, others a tyrant waiting in the wings. But all agreed that if the Targaryen girl truly returned with dragons, the realm would tremble. The crossing was not without its travails. One night, a squall struck the small fleet. Rain lashed the decks and thunder boomed overhead. Lightning shattered the sky in ragged forks that illuminated the roiling sea. Through it all, Daenerys refused to retreat to her cabin. She stood with the men, urging them on, proving that she was not some fragile maiden. Drogon roared at the sky, a furious black shape, while Regal and Viserion screamed their defiance at the churning waves. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the ships battered but afloat. Daenerys caught the admiring glances of the Unsullied, who saw her fortitude and believed in her all the more for it. They made landfall earlier than Daenerys had anticipated, near the coast of Dorne, a place of burning deserts and proud princes. The beaches stretched out, pale and windswept, with tall dunes rising inland like half-buried giants. Despite Barristan Selmy's suggestion that she land farther north, closer to Blackwater Bay, Daenerys decided that Dorne might welcome her. House Martell had its own grievances against the Iron Throne. Elia Martell, sister to Prince Doran, had once been married to Rhaegar Targaryen. She had died brutally during the sack of King's Landing, and the Martells had not forgotten. The seeds of alliance were already there, waiting for someone bold enough to water them. Her ships beached along the lonely coast. The sun hammered down upon them, hot as a smith's forge. Ser Jorah helped her disembark, and the first steps Daenerys took on Westerosi sand felt unreal, like a fever dream from which she might awaken at any moment. Yet the grains beneath her sandals were real, the sky overhead was real, and the gulls circling lazily above were real. She was here. The Targaryen exile had returned to reclaim her birthright. The Dornish were watchful. Scouts appeared on horseback along the ridges of the dunes. Daenerys met them openly, sending Grey Worm to greet them, letting them see the small troop of Unsullied that formed her guard. Drogon, who had grown restless from the voyage, swooped overhead, black wings casting flickering shadows upon the sand. The scouts retreated, as if unsure whether to run or fight. But a day later, word arrived that a delegation would come to parley. Prince Doran Martell himself was not rumored to be in the best of health, but perhaps his envoys would speak for him. And so, Daenerys waited in a makeshift camp among the dunes, her dragons coiling around her in the evenings, devouring goats and fish purchased from nearby villages. She spent the time calming her nerves. Each sunrise felt like an omen, each sunset a promise. She walked among her people, speaking with them. The Unsullied did not complain, but she saw the dryness in their lips, felt their fatigue in the subtle shift of their stances. She ordered fresh water from the local wells. She promised them shade and rest whenever possible. She was no slaver's master. She was their queen, and she would not squander their loyalty. 3 days after their arrival, the Dornish delegation rode into camp, their banners snapping in the wind. Golden suns on spears, red and orange heraldry that gleamed like flames, swirling about them in a riot of color. At their head was Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper himself, lithe in the saddle, his dark eyes shining with a mixture of curiosity and cunning. He dismounted with a flourish, bowing at the waist. Daenerys had heard tales of his skill at arms, his travels to Essos, his knowledge of poisons. She studied him not as a young girl in awe of a famous man, but as a queen examining a potential ally or rival. "My princess," Oberyn greeted with a grin. "Or should I say, my queen." His voice was rich and mocking, but not unkind. He glanced at the Unsullied arrayed behind her. "You have come in strength, I see." "And I come in peace, Prince Oberyn," she replied, measuring each word. "I come to bring fire and blood to my enemies, yes, but to those who would stand beside me, I offer alliance and prosperity." Oberyn tilted his head, noticing Drogon perched atop a tall wooden scaffold nearby, black scales gleaming like polished onyx. "And you come with dragons. That is something few can boast since the doom of your house." He examined the creature for a long moment as though remembering old songs. Then he turned back to Daenerys. "My brother the prince is not as spry as he used to be, but he remembers what happened to Elia and to her children. We have not forgiven the Lannisters for that. If your aim is to topple them, I suspect you may find some friends in Dorne." Daenerys offered him a small smile. "That is exactly my aim. But more than that, I wish to bring justice to the realm, to mend what has been broken, and to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The Targaryens were once rulers of all the 7 kingdoms, and I would see them united again, not through cruelty, but through respect and a shared future. The Lannisters have no claim to the throne that rightfully belongs to the blood of the dragon." Oberyn was silent for a beat, the desert wind tugging at his dark hair. Then he laughed. "I like you, Daenerys Targaryen. You speak with confidence, and I taste no falsehood in your words. But you will find that winning hearts is harder than winning wars. Still, we Martells hold our grudges tightly. The Lannisters will know our sting if we side with you." That evening, under torchlight and moonlight, a tentative alliance began to form. Oberyn and Daenerys spoke at length in a large pavilion set up near the camp. Dornish red wine flowed, and Oberyn regaled her with stories of his youth. He did not mince words about the realm's distrust of Targaryens since Aerys II's madness, but he reminded her that the Martells had not joined Robert's rebellion willingly. They had done so out of necessity after Elia and her children were slain. That wound still bled in Dorne's collective memory, but the thirst for vengeance had cooled into a desire for justice. Oberyn seemed to sense in Daenerys a chance for that justice, or perhaps a chance for Dorne to rise to greater heights. By the time the night had deepened, he was calling her "my queen" and offering to ride north with her. She, in turn, pledged that when she took the throne, Dorne would have its rightful place in the new order. Word of her landing spread like wildfire through the scattered hamlets and towns of Dorne. Whispers flew across the sands, traveling up the Greenblood and along trade routes, eventually reaching King's Landing itself. A Targaryen had landed, a queen with dragons. The small folk of Dorne murmured about whether Prince Doran would rally to her banner. Others speculated that she was merely the tip of a greater invasion. But Daenerys cared little for rumors. She secured a small fortress near the coast, left behind by some minor house that had decamped in the aftermath of repeated raids from outlaws. It offered minimal protection, but with the Unsullied stationed there and the dragons roosting on its half-broken towers, it became a foothold on Westerosi soil. Doran Martell's response arrived in the form of a carefully worded letter. He welcomed the queen's presence, recognized her rightful claim, but stopped short of a formal alliance. Daenerys understood. Prince Doran was calculating. He would see which way the wind blew before committing his full strength. But Oberyn's endorsement was no small thing. The Red Viper was loved by many in Dorne, feared by others, and his open admiration for Daenerys lent her cause an air of legitimacy in the southernmost kingdom. A fortnight after she had landed, Daenerys resolved that she could not simply linger in Dorne, waiting for events to unfold. The longer she remained idle, the more time her enemies in King's Landing would have to plot her downfall. She needed to move. Yet storming King's Landing with only her Unsullied and her 3 young dragons would be suicide. The Lannisters still commanded the gold of Casterly Rock, the loyalty of many lords, and the might of the Crown's armies. Though battered by the War of the Five Kings, they were far from broken. She needed allies. She needed to show she was a liberator, not a conqueror who would reduce castles to ash. Oberyn's suggestion was to ride up through the Stormlands. Many houses there were loyal to Stannis or wavered in their loyalties. If you can convince them that you are a better bet than the Lannisters, some may bend the knee. Others might need to learn the taste of dragonfire. He spoke with a casual malice that made Daenerys wonder if he truly cared about the small folk. But she let it pass. Allies came in many forms. Besides, he added with a grin, the Stormlands are not too far from King's Landing should you desire a swift strike. So it was decided. Daenerys would march north in measured steps. She sent riders ahead, Dornish men loyal to Oberyn, to scout the roads and gauge local sentiments. The Martells promised to provide supplies and guides to assist her crossing of the southern deserts and the mountains that separated Dorne from the Stormlands. It would not be an easy journey. The Red Mountains were notoriously treacherous. But if she could emerge on the other side with a united force, she might find new supporters among the houses that had grown disillusioned with the Iron Throne's wars. The journey began under the glaring sun. Men and women sweated in their armor, cursing the heat. The Unsullied, disciplined as ever, marched in their tight phalanx. Overhead, Drogon, Regal, and Viserion soared, casting fleeting shadows on the sand. Daenerys rode a pale silver mare at the head of the column, accompanied by Yora Missandei, who rode more awkwardly, having rarely been on horseback, and Oberyn, who seemed to relish the heat of his homeland. Barristan and Selmy, still the quiet advisor, rode just behind them. The desert wind howled around them at times, sending small dunes scattering across the narrow passes. Oberyn guided them along lesser-known trails to avoid any ambushes. They passed old stone watchtowers half buried in drifting sands. Sometimes they would come upon a lonely well or a small oasis where caravans of Dornish traders stopped to water their camels. At night, the desert grew cold and Daenerys found herself huddled in furs, listening to the soft breathing of the dragons who would nest near the fires. On those nights, she dreamt of King's Landing in flames, of the Red Keep with its towers burning under dragon breath. She dreamt of the Iron Throne, twisted swords shimmering under torchlight. In those dreams, she saw the ghosts of her father, her brother, all the dead Targaryens beckoning her onward. Sometimes she woke in a sweat, unsure if she was treading the path of salvation or damnation. As they pushed deeper into the mountains, the terrain grew more forbidding. Sheer cliffs rose on either side of winding passes, rocky slopes threatened to crumble beneath the horses' hooves. The Unsullied marched silently, though never faltering. Scouts brought back reports of a few scattered bands of outlaws, but none dared attack a force protected by 3 dragons. Hunger gnawed at them, but Oberyn had arranged for supply trains with mules carrying dried fruits, grains, and salted meats. Water was the greatest concern, yet Daenerys saw to it that no man or woman went thirsty when it could be helped. She knew too well the horrors of thirst from her time wandering the Red Waste. Those memories still shaped her compassion. After many days of weary travel, they crested a pass and looked out upon the rolling green of the Stormlands. The difference was stark. Where Dorne was dry and parched, the lands before them were lush with forests, their canopies a sea of shifting emerald. Clouds swept in from the narrow sea, promising rain. Indeed, it rained almost immediately when they descended, a light patter that turned the dirt roads to mud. But Daenerys did not mind. The dryness of Dorne had taken its toll, and the sweet smell of fresh rain felt like a blessing from the gods. Her presence did not go unnoticed. News traveled ahead of her arrival. The Dragon Queen had come. Some villages barred their gates, fearful of raiders. Others sent out small delegations bearing meager gifts, fresh bread, salt, and sometimes a few goats, hoping to appease the woman who commanded fire-breathing monsters. Daenerys made a point of showing kindness where she could. She paid for provisions instead of demanding them, mindful of the fact that if she wanted to rule these people, she could not act like a pillaging warlord. When she needed to pass through a village, she did so with a courtesy and dignity that surprised many of the local folk. The rumors began to change. Instead of painting her as a monstrous invader, some began to call her the breaker of chains, the mother of dragons who freed slaves across the narrow sea. That name carried weight among the poorest peasants who had only ever known subjugation by one feudal lord or another. But there was no hiding the dragons. Drogon especially had grown in the months since Astapor. His wings seemed wider, his teeth sharper, his roar louder. Whenever he took flight, the local smallfolk cowered under roofs or behind trees, children crying out in fear. Daenerys tried to comfort them, but she knew fear could sometimes be an asset. She could not be a docile lamb if she wished to unseat the lion in King's Landing. They pressed onward, guided by Oberyn's knowledge of the region, for he had traversed it before, and by the occasional local scout who was won over by her cause. Reports trickled in of Lannister forces stationed at various strongholds, though many had been redeployed to quell unrest in the Crownlands. Daenerys saw a chance to win over local lords. She sent word to the keep of House Penrose to House Selmy's ancestral lands, though Barristan was reluctant to reveal his identity just yet, and to the lesser houses that once owed fealty to the Baratheons. Her letters were courteous but clear: bend the knee and join me to restore justice to the realm, or face the wrath of the dragon. Ser Jorah suggested a more forceful approach, but Daenerys insisted that they try to gain allies through diplomacy first. Bloodshed would surely come, but she did not wish to drench the Stormlands if it could be avoided. Inevitably, a few of the local lords rebuffed her. One lesser lord, a distant cousin of the Baratheon line, sent back a scornful reply: "We will not yield to a foreign whore with lizard pets." His contempt was a test of her resolve. When she read his words aloud, Oberyn hissed and reached for his spear. "Shall I teach him a Dornish lesson?" he asked with a deadly glint in his eye. Daenerys was tempted, but she stayed his hand. She decided to deal with that lord herself. With a small detachment of Unsullied, she rode to his holdfast, a modest stone tower on a hill surrounded by farmland. The men of the tower mustered a shaky defense, but their courage melted when Drogon descended from the skies with a roar that shook the very stones. Daenerys did not order the tower burned, though her anger flared hot. Instead, she had Drogon breathe fire on a barren patch of land near the gates, scorching the earth in an awesome display. After that, the gates opened and the small folk poured out, kneeling in abject surrender. She demanded the Lord come forth. He did, trembling, his face pale. Before his entire household, Daenerys asked him, "Do you yield to your rightful queen?" He knelt in the dust, voice quavering. "Yes," he said. "Yes, my queen." She turned to Jorah. "Take him into custody," she commanded softly. "But do not harm his family. We will see if he can learn loyalty." It was a calculated mercy, one she hoped would echo through the land. After that, the minor lords of the Stormlands began to relent. One by one, they sent envoys or came in person to pledge at least neutrality, if not active support. Those who were staunch Lannister supporters retreated toward the Crownlands, unwilling or unable to face the Mother of Dragons. All the while, Daenerys's men found fresh recruits, disgruntled smallfolk, hedge knights, even minor nobility with grudges against the Iron Throne. They came for many reasons: the promise of vengeance against Lannisters, the allure of following a living Targaryen, or simply the fear of what her dragons might do if they resisted. Gradually, her forces swelled. Oberyn had parted ways temporarily, riding to Sunspear to gain his brother's final blessing for an open alliance. When he returned, he brought fresh Dornish spears, 2,000 men, well-equipped, tanned from the desert sun, with braided leather whips at their belts or slender spears in their hands. They were not as disciplined as the Unsullied, but they had the fierce pride of Dorne behind them, and many thirsted for the blood of Lannisters. Daenerys welcomed them with measured gratitude. This was no longer a small band crossing the desert. It was a proper army. As her presence grew, so did the panic in King's Landing, or so the rumors said. Spies reported that Cersei Lannister was furious, scrambling to make alliances. Tyrell influence at court was said to be fracturing, with Margaery Tyrell playing the role of queen consort to young King Tommen, while her grandmother, the Queen of Thorns, squared off against the Lannisters behind closed doors. Many believed the arrival of the Dragon Queen spelled the end for the Lannisters. Yet the Lannisters were cunning. They still had gold enough to buy mercenaries. They still had the power of the throne's official armies and the city watch behind them. And they had no shortage of unscrupulous men who would fight for coin. When Daenerys finally marched closer to the Crownlands, the tension escalated. Roadside hovels lay abandoned, for the peasants feared a clash of armies. The nights were dark and uneasy, lit only by the flickering glow of her campfires. Sometimes she took flight on Drogon's back, though each flight was an exercise in trust. Drogon was still growing, and his will was not always pliable. But she persisted, forging a bond that grew stronger with every takeoff, every dive. From the skies, she scouted villages and castles that dotted the rolling hills leading toward Blackwater Bay. She saw columns of Lannister troops or local levies mustering to defend strategic crossings. She saw the wide, shimmering bay itself, with the formidable walls of King's Landing rising along the horizon. The city was a sprawling mass of rooftops and winding streets, overshadowed by the Red Keep perched high on Aegon's Hill. It called to her like a memory she had never lived, stirring something deep within her blood. And so, the day came that Daenerys Targaryen stood on a grassy rise overlooking the Blackwater rush. Her host gathered behind her, unsullied in neat ranks, Dornish spears shifting in the breeze, hedge knights with patched cloaks, Stormlander levies who had sworn themselves to her cause, and a scattering of freeriders from across the land, lured by tales of the Dragon Queen. Barristan Selmy, at last discarding the disguise of Ars and Whitebeard, stood by her side, silver-haired and proud, wearing the white cloak of the King's Guard he had once graced before being cast out by the Lannisters. Ser Jorah Mormont was near, wearing battered armor but standing firm, his gaze ever watchful. Missandei lingered by Daenerys' horse, her face calm. Grey Worm led the Unsullied, their discipline like a blade waiting to be unsheathed. Across the water, Daenerys could see the smoke of countless chimneys, hear the faint din of the city. But between them and that place loomed the massed ranks of Lannister forces, bolstered by various royal banners. She caught glimpses of gold armor in the distance, bright in the midday sun. Siege engines dotted the field, catapults and scorpions, perhaps meant to bring down her dragons if they dared come too close. She was not reckless. She knew that even a dragon might fall to a well-placed bolt. But fear did not rule her. She had come too far, overcome too much, to shy away now. For a moment, she thought of parley. She considered sending a messenger to demand the city's surrender. But she recalled how Stannis Baratheon had tried to storm these walls and failed, undone by wildfire and cunning. She had a stronger claim, she told herself, and more importantly, she had dragons. Yet the memory of wildfire haunted her, for rumors said there were still caches beneath the city. She needed to be careful. She needed the city to bend, not burn. Daenerys nodded to Ser Jorah and he raised a white banner of truce. She would at least offer the Lannisters a chance to yield, to spare their people from bloodshed. After some time, a small group of knights rode out from the city gates, escorted by gold-cloaked city watchmen. They stopped at the riverbank, holding their own banner of truce. Daenerys rode forward, accompanied by Jorah, Barristan, and Missandei. Grey Worm marched a short distance behind with a column of Unsullied, their spears at the ready. Drogon circled overhead, letting out a roar that echoed across the water. She saw the unease in the eyes of the Lannister envoys. One of them was a tall knight with a lion-crested helm under his arm. He introduced himself as Ser Lal Crakehall. Another was a scribe from the Red Keep, pale-faced and quivering at the sight of the dragon overhead. They offered stiff bows to Daenerys. She inclined her head, regal as a queen, but said nothing. Let them speak first, she decided. Ser Lal cleared his throat. Queen Cersei Lannister sends her regards and bids me ask your purpose here, across the Blackwater from King's Landing. Daenerys let a moment of silence weigh upon the gathering. Then she spoke, her voice carrying across the hush of the field. My purpose? I am Daenerys Storborn of House Targaryen, the first of my name, Queen of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. I have come to claim the Iron Throne that was usurped from my family. I have come to free the people from the tyranny of those who murdered my kin and ruled through fear and cruelty. The scribe swallowed hard, eyes darting to the dragons overhead. Ser Lal tried to remain stoic, but his knuckles whitened on the reins of his horse. Her Grace, Queen Cersei, has no intention of relinquishing the throne. If you mean to assault the city, you will find it well defended. And if you care for the lives of the small folk, you will think twice before unleashing your creatures upon them. Daenerys narrowed her eyes, but kept her composure. The small folk are not my enemy, but I will not suffer the Lannisters to hold what does not belong to them. I offer you this chance, open the gates, lay down your arms, and submit to my rule. If you do, you will find me merciful. If you refuse, then you leave me no choice but to take the city by force. And let it be known I am the mother of dragons. The city will not stand against the fire of my children. She saw Ser Lal's throat bob as he tried to form a response. The scribe looked close to fainting. Ser Lal drew a breath. I will convey your words to the Queen Regent, he said at last. But you must know King Tommen sits upon the Iron Throne. We do not recognize you." Daenerys recalled the rumors that Tommen was a sweet boy, not truly at fault for the crimes of his family. Yet the boy's claim was tainted by incest and usurpation alike. She remained unmoved. "Convey my words faithfully," she said. "That is all I ask." Then she turned her horse and rode back to her lines. The Lannister envoys retreated in haste. She could feel the tension in her host. Men whispered of the coming battle, of the might of King's Landing, of the many unknowns that awaited them. Daenerys dismissed her closest advisors to their duties, then found herself alone at the edge of camp as twilight fell. Drogon landed beside her in a swirl of dust, his scales dark as night. She laid a hand on his snout, feeling the warmth of his breath, the deep rumble in his throat that felt like a latent furnace. In that moment, she thought of all the roads that had led her here, all the pain and struggle, the endless thirsts and hungers of her life. She thought of Khal Drogo, of her lost child Rhaego, of the people she had freed in Slaver's Bay, of the unborn generation in Westeros that might live or die based on what she did next. Was she still that scared girl she had once been, or had she truly become a dragon? When dawn broke, a rider from King's Landing approached under a fresh banner of truce. Daenerys rode out to meet him, with Ser Jorah and Barristan at her side. This time, there was no scribe, only a young knight of the King's Guard, a man who introduced himself as Ser Lancel Lannister. His face was pale, and he bore a haunted look. He delivered Queen Cersei's reply in a nervous rush of words. The Lannisters would not surrender, they would not yield the city. If Daenerys attacked, every means at the crown's disposal would be used to defend King Tommen. Daenerys felt the beat of her heart, the pulsing of destiny in her blood. She nodded once, dismissing Ser Lancel with a cold stare. He galloped back toward the city, half terrified of dragon fire at his back. In the hush that followed, Daenerys turned to her assembled captains, her eyes blazing with conviction. "They have chosen war," she said. "Then war it shall be." Her army advanced, forming ranks in the grassy fields facing the city's walls. Dornish spears took position at the flanks, unsullied in the center, archers and local levies behind them, drawn from the Stormlands. Daenerys herself rode forward, flanked by Jorah and Barristan, with Drogon bounding across the field. Rhaegal and Viserion wheeled overhead, shrieking. On the walls of King's Landing, Daenerys saw scorpions and catapults, a line of gold-cloaked guards. The red and gold banners of House Lannister hung from the battlements, snapping in the wind. She almost expected to see the Baratheon stag or the crowned stag lion of Tommen's sigil. But the Lannister lion was the more prominent. Cersei was making a statement. Drums sounded in Daenerys' host, a steady, ominous beat that rattled in the chest. The flapping wings of dragons added to the tension, a low thrum in the air. Daenerys drew a breath, recalling every lesson of warfare she had learned. Some from Ser Jorah, some from ancient tales, some from sheer necessity. A direct assault on the gates could be bloody. Perhaps she could circumvent them. She remembered how King Aegon I had taken the city centuries ago, with Balerion the Black Dread. Yet she was not her ancestor, and her dragons were not yet so large. But large enough, she prayed. Large enough to break the city's defenses without burning it to cinders. She sent the first wave forward. The Unsullied, marching in perfect unison. Shields locked, spears bristling like a deadly hedgehog. They would test the city's outer defenses, see how the Lannisters responded. Arrows rained down from the walls, some clattering off shields, others finding flesh in the gaps. The Unsullied did not falter. Catapult stones arced overhead, smashing into the ground with thunderous impacts. Daenerys watched them impassively. She dared not commit her dragons too soon, lest she risk them to scorpion bolts. But the time would come, and it would come soon. As the Unsullied reached the main gate, heavy crossbow fire raked them. Men fell, but the gaps in their line closed swiftly. They began to batter at the gate with rams. The echo of wood wood resounding across the field. The gate was iron-bound oak, formidable but not impregnable. Meanwhile, at other points along the walls, the Dornish spearmen advanced, aiming to draw defenders away. The archers behind them loosed volley after volley, pinning down the Lannister forces on the ramparts. It was a storm of chaos and fury, the clang of steel, the cries of the wounded. Daenerys' horse whinnied, stamping at the ground. Rhaegal and Viserion let out shrieks from high above, though they held back at her silent command. At last she turned to Barristan. "Sound the charge for the second wave," she commanded. She had a mix of horsemen, mounted Dornish knights and Stormlander riders, who would sweep along the walls, seeking any weak points. The thunder of hooves soon filled the air. Then the defenders unleashed their scorpions, bolts the size of spears whizzing through the sky. One soared dangerously close to Rhaegal, grazing his wing and drawing an angry roar. The green-scaled dragon recoiled, but he did not fall. Daenerys felt her heart skip. She could not let them be easy targets. That was her signal. She spurred her horse forward, drawing breath to steady herself. She looked up at Drogon, who circled overhead, his red-black wings outspread. "Dracarys," she whispered, though he was too high to hear. But the bond they shared, forged in fire, transcended mere words. With a roar, Drogon dove. Flame erupted from his maw, a jet of orange-red that engulfed a section of the battlements in a dazzling spray of fire. Screams rose from the defenders. A scorpion collapsed in a hail of burning wood. Daenerys felt a fierce triumph surge in her veins, tempered by the knowledge that men were dying in that flame. Yet she steeled herself. This was war. She had given them a chance to surrender. Rhaegal and Viserion followed suit, swooping along the wall in a coordinated sweep, spitting gouts of flame that forced the defenders to duck for cover. Some tried to fire bolts upward, but the dragons moved too swiftly, weaving through the sky with lethal grace. The gate shuddered under the renewed battering, now set partially aflame by Drogon's pass. The Unsullied pressed harder, unstoppable in their discipline. The wooden barrier began to crack. Daenerys could see the smoke rising higher, see men leaping from the ramparts to escape the dragon fire. She thought of the innocents in the city, prayed they would find shelter. This was not the sack she wanted, but the Lannisters had forced her hand. Amid the chaos, a section of the outer wall crumbled from repeated blasts of flame and the pounding of siege rams. Dust and rubble cascaded. Dornish spearmen poured through the breach, leading the charge into the city. Daenerys could hear the clamor of fighting within, screams echoing off stone alleys. She spurred her horse forward, following in the wave of her troops. "Forward," she cried, her voice ringing. Yora was at her side, sword in hand. Barristan, older but no less deadly, kept pace. Inside the walls, King's Landing was a labyrinth of narrow streets filled with terrified small folk, gold cloaks trying to organize a defense, and the creeping tendrils of smoke from the fires above. The dragons wheeled overhead, casting an ever-present dread across the rooftops. Daenerys' forces pressed toward the Red Keep, methodically pushing back pockets of resistance. The gold cloaks were outmatched by the Unsullied's precision and the Dornish fervor. The final stand, Daenerys knew, would be in the Red Keep itself. As she advanced, she saw some of her men begin to loot, drawn by the temptation of city spoils. She reined in her horse, fury blazing in her eyes. "Stop," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of a queen. "Any man found looting will face my justice. We are not butchers. We are here to liberate this city, not to pillage it." Her words and the presence of the Unsullied, who remained steadfastly obedient, curbed the worst impulses among her followers. Still, chaos reigned in the side streets. Civilians fled, screaming, while scattered Lannister loyalists fought in vain. The approach to the Red Keep was heavily defended, with archers on the walls and a cluster of gold-cloaked soldiers brandishing pikes. Daenerys dismounted, handing the reins to a nearby soldier. She would not risk her horse in the narrow approach. Yora and Barristan formed up around her. "We must press on," she said. "I will not let them regroup." Grey Worm led the Unsullied in a furious charge. Arrows rained down, skewering men, but they did not break. They slammed into the Lannister lines with practiced coordination. Spears thrust and shields locked. The gold cloaks wavered, then broke, some throwing down their weapons. Daenerys strode after them, stepping through the open yard toward the Red Keep's massive doors. High above, she spotted the shape of Drogon perched on a tower, roaring defiance at anyone who dared show their face. Within the keep, corridors echoed with the crash of steel. A few Kingsguard knights tried to mount a last defense. Daenerys saw Ser Meryn Trant, recognized from descriptions, brandishing a longsword. Barristan engaged him in a flurry of blows. The old knight was still swift, and soon Ser Meryn lay bleeding on the cold stones. Deeper in, Cersei's supporters made their stand. But nothing could stop the unstoppable tide of a queen returned with dragons. The final corridor leading to the throne room was choked with bodies, the smell of blood and smoke thick in the air. When Daenerys finally stepped into the throne room, she found it in disarray. Many courtiers had fled, leaving scattered chairs and fallen banners. At the far end, upon the Iron Throne, sat Tommen Baratheon, or Lannister, as many whispered. Beside him stood his mother, Cersei, face contorted in rage and desperation. Ser Robert Strong, the towering silent knight rumored to be Gregor Clegane reborn, loomed behind her. A few gold cloaks remained, trembling near the columns, uncertain if they should stand or run. Daenerys walked forward, her boots echoing on the marble floor. Smoke drifted in through broken windows, giving the air a stifling feel. Jorah and Barristan flanked her. Cersei's eyes burned with hatred, but Tommen looked merely terrified, a boy too young for the throne, clutching his crown as though it might vanish. "You dare invade my city?" Cersei snarled. "You think you can just take what belongs to my son?" Daenerys took a breath. "Your city? My forebears built this Red Keep. My family ruled these 7 kingdoms for centuries. The Lannisters seized it through betrayal and murder. It is time to right those wrongs." Cersei's hands shook, though her voice was steady with venom. "You are nothing but a pretender with a savage horde and monsters at your command. You will burn this city just as your father threatened. You are your father's daughter." Daenerys' voice rang clear. "I am not my father. I offered you surrender. You refused. Now I will spare the city if it yields. But I will not suffer the Lannisters to hold power any longer." Tommen glanced at his mother, fear etched in every feature. He was a child. Daenerys felt a pang of sorrow. She knew what it was to be a child thrown into a world of ruthless ambition. But she could not let him keep the throne. She turned her gaze to the boy king. "Do you willingly renounce your claim to the Iron Throne?" Cersei snarled, but Tommen opened his mouth, eyes brimming with tears. He seemed incapable of speech. Cersei clutched his arm. "Don't you dare," she hissed. "Your blood is royal. Your father—" Daenerys cut her off. "His father is Jaime Lannister, if the rumors speak true. Or was it your other brother? Does it matter now? The realm knows the truth. The Targaryens have returned." A hush fell over the throne room. Somewhere in the distance, a dragon roared and the walls quivered with the force of it. Cersei's lips parted, and for a moment Daenerys thought she might launch into another tirade. But then Ser Robert Strong stepped forward, massive sword in hand. Barristan tensed. The Colossus in armor prepared to strike. Daenerys found her heart pounding. She had heard stories of the Mountain, of his brutality. If this was indeed some foul reanimation, it would not be an easy foe. Jorah and Barristan moved to defend her. Yet at that very moment, Drogon appeared outside the shattered windows, hooking his claws into the stone. His massive head loomed inside, teeth bared, a growl rumbling that shook the throne room. Ser Robert hesitated, a flicker of confusion behind his visor. In that instant, Grey Worm and 2 Unsullied leapt forward from the side, thrusting spears at the giant knight. Barristan joined in, lashing out with a slash that found a gap. Ser Robert crumpled with an unearthly groan. Cersei shrieked as the monstrous body collapsed at her feet, black fluid leaking from the joints in the armor. Tommen was sobbing, trembling. Cersei clutched him, her face a mask of fury and despair. Daenerys raised her hand. "I do not wish to slaughter children, Cersei. The boy will be spared if you yield. You too may live, but you will face justice for your crimes." Cersei's eyes flashed. "You think I fear your justice? I fear no one. I have lost everything worth losing. If you let me live, I will tear you down piece by piece. I will." Her words died in her throat as Drogon snarled again. Smoke curled from his nostrils. Daenerys felt a profound tiredness settling over her. The thirst for vengeance warred with her desire to be a just ruler. She knew that if she let Cersei live, the Queen Mother would scheme until her dying breath. But Daenerys was not the Mad King. She would not burn women alive for sport. She glanced at her advisors. Barristan's face was grim, Jorah's was guarded. "Take them both into custody," she said softly. "Any who resist, kill them if you must, but spare the child if you can." Cersei lashed out, her fingernails catching an unsullied guard's face before 2 more seized her. She raved and screamed, cursing Daenerys' name. Tommen wept openly, offering no resistance. The gold cloaks in the throne room dropped their weapons. It was done. The Iron Throne stood empty. Daenerys stepped toward it, each footstep echoing in her ears. The throne was massive, forged of 1,000 swords hammered together in the heat of Dragonfire centuries ago. It loomed like a jagged predator, each blade forming twisted shapes. As she neared, she felt the weight of history pressing down upon her. Her ancestors had sat here. Her father had disgraced himself here. Now she, Daenerys Stormborn, would reclaim it. She reached out a trembling hand. The metal was cold to the touch, despite all the fire and blood that had been shed over it. She heard the crackle of flames in the distance, the screams of men still echoing from the city's streets. She felt the eyes of her followers upon her. Unsullied, Dornishmen, Stormlanders, all waiting for this moment. She ascended the steps, robes trailing behind her. When she turned, she faced the throne room, a swirl of smoke and dust caught in the broken rays of sunlight from the windows. Through the shattered stone, she could see Drogon perched outside, regal and Viserion circling above. She lowered herself onto the iron throne, the ancient steel cool and unyielding beneath her. The hall fell silent. Yora and Barristan sank to their knees, tears glistening in Barristan's aged eyes. Grey Worm bowed his head. Missandei, her face shining with pride, followed suit. Soldiers across the room did the same. One by one, they knelt, heads lowered, as if acknowledging that history itself was changing in that moment. Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen had come home early, and the Seven Kingdoms would never be the same. She gazed down the length of the throne room, torn between triumph and a solemn awareness of what this would cost. The realm was not at peace yet. There would be rebellions, vengeance, old wounds that needed healing. But the first step had been taken. She was queen, truly queen, at last. Her dragons roared in the sky, and the city shuddered under their thunderous call, welcoming the return of the dragon's reign. She closed her eyes, letting the tumult wash over her. Across the narrow sea, her path had been fraught with betrayal and heartbreak. Here in Westeros, she would have to prove she was worthy of the crown she had claimed. No Targaryen would ever again rule by fear alone. She would have to unite, to mend, to forge a new path. But for this moment, in the hush that followed the city's fall, she allowed herself a single breath of victory. She had come sooner than her foes expected. She had come with dragons. And the realm, still broken by war, turned its eyes to the Iron Throne. The queen who had crossed the sea at last sat upon the seat of her ancestors, at once fragile and unyielding, ready to reshape the fate of the Seven Kingdoms with the fire in her blood. Daenerys Targaryen, seated on the Iron Throne, kept her spine straight despite the exhaustion weighing on her muscles. In the echoing vastness of the throne room, the crackle of distant flames and the murmurs of her host mingled with the pungent smell of soot, blood, and fear. King's Landing had fallen swiftly, not without bloodshed, but with less devastation than some might have predicted when word first spread that a dragon queen had arrived at the gates. Outside, her armies still secured the streets and subdued the last pockets of resistance, while the three dragons circled the skies, watchful in their power. Cersei Lannister had been dragged away under heavy guard, still shrieking curses at anyone within earshot. Her son, the boy King Tommen, had fallen mute, his face as white as the marble columns that rose around the throne. He had been escorted from the hall and placed under careful watch in one of the Red Keep's less luxurious towers. Daenerys had ordered her men to treat the child gently and to ensure he did not come to harm. Whatever his parentage, he was still just a boy. In the hush that followed the queen's first moments upon the throne, Ser Jorah Mormont rose from where he'd knelt. His armor was dented in places, splashed with the grime of battle, but his eyes shone with an odd mixture of relief and vigilance. He stepped forward, bowing formally. "My queen," he said quietly. "There is still fighting in Flea Bottom and some confusion near the Dragonpit. The Gold Cloaks have thrown down their weapons in many quarters, but a few refuse to yield. We should send more Unsullied to ensure there is no further slaughter." Daenerys inclined her head, her expression grave. "See to it, Ser Jorah. Instruct Grey Worm that I want minimal bloodshed. The city is mine, but I have not come to lay it to waste." Ser Jorah bowed again and strode from the hall, footfalls echoing on the polished floor. Barristan Selmy stood nearby, his sword arm spattered with dark stains, though none of the blood was his. He had a weary dignity about him, as though the triumph of reclaiming the Red Keep left him with both pride and an uneasy heart. He approached, bowed at the waist. "Your Grace, if I may, there is the matter of your coronation. The small folk will want to see you, to know you intend to rule in truth, not simply conquer. They've heard too many claims to that throne over the years." Daenerys regarded him. She remembered him from years ago when he had served her father and brother. He had hidden his identity from her for a time, but she had forgiven him once he proved his loyalty. "You think I should appear before them so soon?" Barristan nodded. "Yes, Your Grace. Appear not as a conqueror who would raise the city, but as a rightful monarch. Show them you mean to protect them. If you wish to hold King's Landing without fostering rebellion in every alley, that is the surest way." Daenerys glanced around the throne room at the twisted swords and the high windows cracked with the aftermath of dragon fire. She had dreamed of this place all her life, but she had never let herself believe it would simply solve all her burdens just by sitting upon the throne. "Very well, Ser Barristan," she said, "but I will not make a spectacle of triumph while the city burns. Let the fires be extinguished first. Let the people have water. Let them see that we are not devils come to torment them." Barristan bowed once more. "As you say, I will convey your orders to the men. And if you require further counsel, I remain at your side, your grace." She inclined her head, watching as he departed with purposeful steps. The Red Keep was still in chaos, servants cowering behind pillars or skittering through corridors, uncertain which master they now served, gold cloaks who had surrendered standing in small knots, stripped of their weapons and ringed by Unsullied. The gruesome corpse of Ser Robert Strong, whatever foul necromancy had animated him, lay slumped near the hall's threshold, thick black fluid seeping from his battered armor. Daenerys suppressed a shudder. The echoes of the Mad King's final days clung to these stones, and she wanted to banish all such nightmares. Her gaze flicked over the throne room once more, taking in the men and women who'd accompanied her from across the sea and from Dorne. Among them, she noticed Missandei, who stood quietly near the dais. The young Nathi woman wore a light cloak for the sake of propriety in the smoky air, but she was otherwise, as Daenerys remembered, poised, calm, her bright eyes watchful. Daenerys beckoned her closer. "Missandei," Daenerys said, her voice soft enough that the words wouldn't carry far. "Send word to the people, we offer them peace. Anyone bearing arms against us must lay them down or face the dragons. Anyone not in arms will be protected. The markets will reopen as soon as the fires are extinguished, and we will pay for goods to feed the hungry. I do not wish them to starve. And we must ensure that water is brought into Flea Bottom. The city's wells alone will not suffice." Missandei bowed her head. "Yes, your grace. I will send runners through the streets, announcing your commands. And I will have the men distribute what food is left in the royal stores." Daenerys bit her lip. She wondered how much actually remained in the royal granaries. Cersei had likely used plenty of it to feed her loyal soldiers. But the city was vast and it needed order. "See to it," Daenerys said, then watched Missandei slip away with the quiet efficiency she had always displayed. A faint clamor from beyond the throne room's far doors told her that the Red Keep was still half in turmoil. She could hear the occasional cry, the slamming of doors, the barked orders of the Unsullied. Yet with every passing moment, the new reality of her reign was sinking into King's Landing. The Lannisters had fallen. The Targaryen banner, which she had ordered hoisted atop the highest tower, now snapped in the wind, black and red for all to see. It felt surreal, and Daenerys found herself exhaling a small, disbelieving breath. She had done it. She had returned. Even so, she knew her challenges were only just beginning. This victory was one step, however monumental, in a larger struggle to reunite the Seven Kingdoms. The city could rebel if she acted only through terror. The lords of Westeros might move against her if they saw only a foreigner with dragons. She would have to mend the wounds, show them that a Targaryen queen could be both strong and just. She reminded herself of the names the people had called her across the sea: Breaker of Chains, Mysa. She intended to earn those names here as well. The clang of approaching footsteps made her straighten on the throne. Two Unsullied stepped into the hall, flanking someone who walked between them with surprising poise. Daenerys' heart flipped when she recognized the short, wiry form, Tyrion Lannister. She had never met the imp face-to-face in this timeline of events, but she knew of him from rumors, from stories gleaned in Essos, and from bits of intelligence that had filtered across the sea. He had not been accounted for among the defenders at the gate. Now he appeared in the Red Keep, wearing a thin, sardonic smile behind his scruffy beard. He halted before the throne, bowed awkwardly at the waist, and looked up at her with mismatched eyes. "Your Grace, I suppose congratulations are in order. I did advise my dear sister to surrender, though I doubt she listened." Daenerys studied him. So this was the Lannister whom many claimed was as cunning as he was irreverent. He appeared calm, despite being surrounded by enemies. "Lord Tyrion," she said, her voice ringing across the hush. "I have heard much about you. Some say you saved King's Landing once, during Stannis Baratheon's siege. Yet now the city is mine. Why did you not join the battle?" Tyrion pursed his lips. "Because I knew it was a lost cause," he said plainly. "I warned Cersei that dragons are not so easily thwarted, especially 3 of them. She insisted her scorpions would suffice. We see how that turned out." He glanced about, taking in the broken windows and charred stones. "Is my nephew still alive?" King Tommen is in custody, Daenerys said. I do not intend to harm him unless he becomes a danger. Tyrion let out a soft exhale that might have been relief. Then that's good. He truly is a sweet boy. As sweet a child as one can be when born to, well, you've met Cersei. I'd rather see him spared from a traitor's death. Not that I have much love left for House Lannister, but Tommen is innocent in his own way. Daenerys offered a small nod, though she kept her face composed. You speak with caution. Are you here to pledge your loyalty, or have you come to beg for your life? A crooked grin tugged at Tyrion's mouth. Must those be my only two options? Perhaps I've come to offer you my counsel. Kings and queens often have need of clever men, especially when they wish to hold a city as large as King's Landing without burning it to ash. I suspect you'd prefer not to rule over rubble. She studied him, remembering how Yora and Barristan had each offered their perspectives on this man. Some called him a brilliant mind, a master of court intrigue. Others called him a murderer who had shot his own father with a crossbow. But she recalled also that her father had been unkind to many, that the Lannisters had shown no mercy during Robert's rebellion. All of Westeros was drenched in old vendettas. Stand aside for now, Lord Tyrion, she said at length. I will consider what use you might be. My men will see you placed under watch, but you shall not be harmed unless you give me reason. Tyrion bowed again, ironically graceful. I've had worse offers. I accept. A faint gesture from Daenerys dispatched two Unsullied to escort him away. She watched Tyrion vanish beyond the throne room doors, her mind already flicking to the next matter. The city needed calm. The realm needed to know that a new monarch sat the throne. And beyond that, she had to consider the other 6 kingdoms that were not yet hers in truth, only in claim. Ser Barristan returned before long, his expression set. Your Grace, the fires are nearly contained. Grey Worm's men are patrolling the streets. Those W. Ho remain loyal to you are gathering in the squares. The people will want to see you. Some are frightened. Many are uncertain. Daenerys pushed herself up from the Iron Throne, feeling the stiffness in her legs. Then I will go to them, she said. Have Missandei summon the city's remaining officers, Gold Cloak captains, trade wardens, the High Septon if he is still alive. I want them to see that I do not come as a butcher. Barristan nodded and led her out of the throne room. The Red Keep's corridors were shadowed, lit only by torches in sconces. Daenerys passed by old tapestries bearing the crowned stag of Baratheon and the lion of Lannister. Many were charred at the edges. She felt a pang at the memory of her own house's downfall, her mother, her brother Rhaegar. This keep had known many rulers. Now it knew her. When she emerged into the upper bailey, the air was thick with the odor of smoke, yet the wind carried the faint tang of salt from Blackwater Bay. She glanced up to see Drogon perched on one of the ramparts, tail lashing. Regal and Viserion soared overhead, occasionally emitting shrill calls. The day was bright, the sun glaring on the red stone. Her blood sang in her veins. It was a moment of possibility. As she walked, surrounded by Unsullied and a handful of Dornish guards who had remained close, the castle staff began to bow or curtsy, though many did so with trembling limbs. Some had tears in their eyes, whether from fear or relief, she could not tell. A stable boy cowered behind a trough until one of the guards motioned him to stand aside. Daenerys tried to keep her expression gentle, regal but not harsh. She remembered what it was to be small and terrified. She made her way through the gates of the Red Keep, down toward the city proper. The wide thoroughfare that ran along the base of Aegon's high hill was littered with debris, splintered wood from siege engines, battered shields, and the occasional body. Unsullied and Dornish spearmen had begun to clear it, dragging detritus aside. The city's inhabitants peeked out from alleys, from doorways as wide as the queen passed by. In a broad square near the remains of an old sept, a crowd had gathered. It was a melange of small folk, ragged children, burly smiths, washerwomen, fishmongers. Some gold cloaks were among them, hands empty, heads bowed. Over them all loomed Grey Worm, standing at the head of the Unsullied, his posture rigid. As Daenerys approached, the hush that fell was almost eerie. She lifted her head, speaking so all could hear. People of King's Landing, she began, her voice resonant. I am Daenerys Storeborn of House Targaryen, and I have come to claim what was once my family's. But I do not come to enslave or butcher. I know you have suffered through war and strife. I know you fear what a dragon queen might bring. Hear me now, I bring justice as I did across the sea. I will feed you if I can, protect you if you submit to my reign. My dragons are not here to burn you unless you force my hand through violence. Stand with me and we shall forge a new peace. Resist me and face the fire. There was silence in the crowd, broken only by a child's cough. Then a few faces lit with something like hope. Whispers rustled. They had heard rumors of the mother of dragons, the breaker of chains. Word of her freeing the slaves in Astapor and Yukai had spread across the narrow sea in seafaring tales. Some of the small folk stepped forward tentatively. A grizzled man in stained clothes knelt, pressing his forehead to the cobbles. A washerwoman followed suit, tears on her cheeks. Then others joined in, bowing low as if seeking salvation. Daenerys felt a tremor in her chest. This was not Slaver's Bay where she had broken chains by toppling a cruel institution. But the small folk here had known oppression too, if of a different sort. She looked to Grey Worm, who gave her a respectful nod. She turned back to the kneeling people. "Stand," she said gently. "I do not ask that you crawl. I only ask that you acknowledge the rightful queen." They stood, uncertain, glancing at one another. A child tugged at Daenerys' cloak, eyes wide. "Are you truly the Dragon Queen?" the child asked, voice wavering. Daenerys knelt to meet those wide eyes. "I am," she said, not unkindly. "But my dragons will not harm you." From overhead came a deafening roar as Drogon swept across the sky, wings casting a sweeping shadow that slid over the square. Several people cried out in alarm, shrinking back. Daenerys placed a reassuring hand on the child's shoulder. "Be calm," she said. "He is only looking for me. He will not burn you." The child nodded, though seemed half in disbelief. Daenerys rose. "Bring water to those who need it," she said to Grey Worm and the local wardens who had begun to gather. "Ensure the wounded are treated if we can. We must do better than our predecessors." Grey Worm saluted, crisp and solemn. The local wardens, men uncertain of their futures but relieved to see the city spared from a full sack, hurried to follow the orders. Daenerys lingered, letting the people see her, letting them see that she was not fleeing behind the walls of the Red Keep like a tyrant, but rather trying to calm the chaos. In the distance, columns of smoke still curled from a few rooftops, but the worst of the fires had gone out or been smothered. Shattered scorpions and catapults lay in blackened heaps. Bodies of Lannister soldiers were lined up along the street, to be buried or burned. It was a macabre spectacle, but the cost of war was always harsh. She surveyed the damage with a quiet ache in her heart. Then, hearing footsteps behind her, she turned to see Ser Jorah returning. He had removed his dented helm, letting sweat drip down his forehead, and his eyes flicked over the crowd. "Your Grace, the City Watch has mostly laid down arms, but some men have fled westward. We've sent riders to intercept them, but they may try to rejoin any Lannister forces that remain outside the city walls." Daenerys nodded. "We will deal with that soon enough." She turned her gaze to the looming mass of the Red Keep high above. "For now, let the city see that I do not come as a butcher. They will soon learn that the choice is theirs: bend the knee or stand against me." Jorah bowed, then glanced about with a stern expression. "We should return you to the keep, Your Grace. There are still many uncertain elements in the city. An assassin's bolt can come from any window." Daenerys hesitated. A part of her wished to remain among the small folk to ease their fears in person. But she also knew the wisdom of Jorah's caution. She had come too far, taken too many risks. "Very well," she said, "but arrange for food and water to be distributed as swiftly as possible. Let them see that we do not hoard the spoils." Jorah signaled to a handful of Unsullied, who formed a protective cordon around her. Daenerys cast one more long look at the faces of those around her, hungry, hopeful, frightened. Then she let Jorah guide her up the winding streets toward the keep. As they ascended, the wind off Blackwater Bay carried a briny tang, as though reminding her that her journey from across the sea had reached its climax. She hoped it was not also reminding her of the storms yet to come. Back within the thick walls, Daenerys found Barristan and Selmy engaged in quiet conversation with a group of surviving city officials, a master of the guilds, a frightened scribe from the royal bureaucracy, and a pair of lesser nobles who had apparently decided to remain in King's Landing rather than flee. Missandei stood off to the side, taking careful notes in her neat handwriting. They all turned as Daenerys approached. The nobles offered uneasy bows, while the guild master and scribe fell to their knees in submission. Daenerys gestured for them to stand. "I understand you have been part of administering the city's trade and upkeep," she said, her tone firm but not cruel. "I will need your knowledge if we are to rebuild quickly and restore order." The guild master was a short, stout man with sweat glistening on his brow. "Your Grace, I served the previous crown as best I could. I will serve you now. The fishmongers, the cobblers, the tanners, I have their ledgers and records. Whatever you require." Daenerys nodded. "Good. First, see that the remaining food stores are tallied and distributed. No one is to be denied. The city has endured enough. Then we will discuss the harbor, trade routes, tolls. The realm is fractured, and we cannot rely on gold from the Lannisters alone to keep the city fed." The man bobbed his head, eyes wide. "Yes, Your Grace." Immediately. She glanced at Barristan. And the nobility, she asked in a measured tone. These men and women, do they speak for all the great houses of the crownlands? One of the lesser lords stepped forward. He was gaunt, with a trimmed beard. Your Grace, the great lords of the crownlands have gone to ground. Most had aligned themselves with the Boy King. When you took the city, they either fled or barricaded themselves in nearby castles. Some of those castles may yield if you approach with dragons, others may resist. But for the moment, here in King's Landing, your rule is undisputed. Daenerys met his gaze, searching for signs of deception. He seemed earnest enough, or simply too scared to lie. I will deal with those castles in time, she said. For now, King's Landing is what matters. Aid the city as I have commanded. We will speak again soon. With that, Barristan dismissed the group. Missandei lingered behind, ready to provide further details. Daenerys ran a hand across her brow, her energy waning. She had led armies and conquered cities before, but King's Landing felt heavier, the seat of power in Westeros, the symbol of the realm. Ruling this place would be more difficult than toppling the slave cities had been. Here, the nobility had their own power structures and the small folk did not necessarily adore her. They feared her, or they simply wanted a day's peace. She would have to navigate it all. Your Grace, Missandei said softly, stepping closer, you must rest at some point. It has been a long day and night, and you have hardly eaten. Daenerys gave a wry smile. I have known longer days, Missandei, but you are right. Let us find a secure place to rest within the keep. In truth, every muscle in Daenerys's body felt tight, every nerve raw. She recalled how, during the march through the desert wastelands, she had forced herself to keep going without respite. Now, in this place she had coveted for so long, she felt an odd mixture of triumph and dread. She allowed Missandei to guide her to a suite once occupied by some highborn courtier. The bedchamber overlooked the sprawl of the city through tall, arched windows. When Daenerys sank onto a cushioned chair, exhaustion washed over her in a sudden wave and her eyelids drooped. Still, she did not allow herself the luxury of sleep at once. She gestured for Missandei to sit. What word from the rest of the realm? I have seized King's Landing, but the north, the Vale, the Riverlands, they may have concerns. Missandei frowned thoughtfully. Little new information has reached us since our scouts crossed the Stormlands. But we do have some knowledge. In the Riverlands, House Tully was nearly destroyed and the Freys rose in power under the Lannisters' favor. Yet with the Lannisters now in disarray, that might change. The Vale remains under Littlefinger's influence, or so rumor claims. The North, well, the North has been torn by war. Some say the Boltons hold Winterfell. Others claim a Stark remains in the field. The Iron Islands are restless too, as they always are. Daenerys sighed. A fractured realm indeed. And now I must patch it together. One step at a time. She felt a twinge of longing for her dragons, who likely perched about the keep or soared the skies, free of mortal cares. She envied their clarity of purpose. I will rest for a moment, she told Missandei. Then we shall see who else demands an audience. She closed her eyes. Sleep nudged at her, but the images behind her lids were fierce and vivid flashes of dragonfire, screaming men, the swirl of dust and cinders. At some point, she dozed, and in her half-dream, she saw Khal Drogo in the Red Waste, calling her his moon and stars. She saw Rhaego, the child who never drew breath. She saw the black sails of ships crossing the narrow sea. Then came the memory of a city in flames, except the city was not King's Landing. It was some other place, a cold place with swirling snow and looming shadows that walked like men. She jolted awake, heart-pounding. The room had grown dim, lit only by the dying glow of evening. Missandei had left, presumably to oversee matters of administration. Daenerys rose from the chair, her limbs stiff, and crossed to the window. Beyond the silhouette of the city, the sun was sinking into a molten horizon. Torches dotted King's Landing, a pattern of flickering lights that revealed the shape of the labyrinth below. She wondered if the small folk slept easier knowing a new ruler sat the Iron Throne, or if they trembled at the thought of a Targaryen's return. A knock at the door startled her. Ser Jorah entered, bowing. Your Grace, Oberyn Martell has arrived at the keep. He asks for an audience. Daenerys nodded, smoothing her hair. Very well. Show him in. Jorah departed, and moments later, the Red Viper himself sauntered into the chamber. He wore a flowing Dornish robe, half open at the chest, with a spear strapped to his back, an odd affectation for a meeting with a queen, but typical of Oberyn's flair. He bowed deeply, though the grin on his face never quite vanished. My queen, Oberyn said. I see you've claimed your father's throne. Congratulations. He moved to the window, gazing at the city lights with a lingering look of satisfaction. Dorne will be pleased that we have new management, especially if the new management is inclined to punish the Lannisters for old crimes. Daenerys stepped closer, crossing her arms over her chest. I will do justice where justice is due, but I have no wish to turn Westeros into a battlefield of endless revenge. Oberyn chuckled softly. Revenge is something Dornishmen understand very well, my queen. But perhaps you have the right of it. The realm needs peace. Still, you promised Dorne its due if we supported your claim. We have spilt blood for you, march with you. Daenerys' gaze hardened. And I have not forgotten. Once my rule is secure, Prince Dorne may name his terms, and I shall hear them in good faith. But do not mistake me for one who will bow to threats. Oberyn's grin widened, though it carried no humor. I make no threats, only reminders. My brother, the prince, has waited long for justice for our sister, Elia. The men who perpetrated her murder are mostly dead. True, but the Lannisters shielded them and benefited from their crimes. Dorne has not forgotten. Nor will we forget that you are the blood of Rhaegar Targaryen, who was Elia's husband. Daenerys understood. The Martells had a personal claim upon her house. Elia Martell had been Rhaegar's wife, the mother of 2 children who'd been slain by Lannister bannermen under Tywin's orders. Blood ties and blood feuds intertwined. Dorne shall be rewarded for its loyalty, she said, letting her tone soften slightly. But for now, let us focus on restoring order in the Crownlands and beyond. If the realm plunges into further war, the small folk will pay the highest price. Oberyn nodded, crossing his arms. A fair sentiment, and a wise one, though I must ask, what becomes of the boy Tommen and his mother? Is she to face the headsman's block or the dragon's fire? Daenerys' stomach twisted at the question. She had allowed herself no illusions about the ultimate fate of Cersei Lannister. The woman had orchestrated countless atrocities, though the realm's justice was rarely as simple as a single sword stroke. I will have her tried, Daenerys said after a moment, not merely for her crimes against my house, but for the cruelties inflicted upon the realm. Let the people see that I do not kill without cause. A fair trial, overseen by men of honor. Then her fate will be decided. As for Tommen, he is but a child, though a child who wore a usurped crown. Still, I see no justice in taking his head. Oberyn shrugged, as though indifferent. As you wish. Perhaps the boy can live out his days in some holdfast, or join the Night's Watch if you are feeling especially merciful. It will keep him from inciting rebellions in his name. Daenerys considered the notion. It is an option, she said quietly, but I have yet to decide. Oberyn studied her face for a moment, then inclined his head. I look forward to seeing how you shape this realm, Daenerys Stormborn. Perhaps a queen with dragons can enforce peace more effectively than any of us could alone. With that, he bade her good night and left the chamber in a swirl of Dornish fabrics. Daenerys watched him go, reflecting on how alliances in Westeros felt more slippery than the ones she had forged in Essos. There, she had battled slavers and tyrants, a straightforward foe. Here, she would have to balance the desires of proud houses, each with its own grudges and ambitions. Night deepened. Daenerys found a few hours of uneasy rest, enough to stave off collapse, though her dreams were troubled by images of 1,000 swords turned molten in dragonfire. When she awoke in the small hours, she ate a simple meal of bread and figs with watered wine, then dressed in a pale gown that Missandei had found in the Red Keep stores. It did not fit her perfectly, but it would suffice until she had proper garments made in the Targaryen style. She affixed a light cloak bearing the 3-headed dragon sigil. The knowledge that the city outside was mostly subdued gave her some measure of calm. Morning brought a gathering in the throne room. The large space was lit by tall windows admitting the first golden rays of sunlight. Torchlight flickered in corners where the sun had yet to reach. Daenerys entered flanked by Ser Jorah, Barristan, Grey Worm, and Missandei. The hush fell again, but this time the air felt less tense, more anticipatory. Soldiers, former courtiers, and various city functionaries lined the walls, while a group of captives knelt in the center of the hall. Daenerys recognized some: Cersei Lannister, shackled at the wrists, her face gaunt and furious. Tommen, beside her, eyes puffy and haunted. Pycelle, the old Grand Maester, though in truth the Citadel might have revoked his chain for all she knew. Several Goldcloak officers, heads bowed. Cersei stared daggers at Daenerys, her tangled blonde hair half covering her face. Even in shackles, she exuded hatred. Tommen, by contrast, looked like he might faint from terror. The old man Pycelle wavered in place, leaning on a cane, beady eyes flicking across the assembled. Daenerys ascended the steps of the Iron Throne, then turned to face them. Her voice carried clearly. Tommen Baratheon, known to some as Tommen of House Lannister, your claim to the Iron Throne was false. You stand before me now not as a king, but as a child of a usurping house. I will grant you mercy. You will be confined within the Red Keep until I decide your fate, but you will be treated with kindness. She gestured to two Unsullied. They lifted Tommen gently, leading him away from his mother. The boy did not resist, but looked back at Cersei with trembling lips. Then he was gone, escorted out of the throne room. Cersei spat at the floor. You talk of mercy while tearing my son away? Monster. Daenerys regarded her calmly. A queen who was truly Mon. Stros might have burned the city to the ground and made slaves of every living soul. I have done neither. You, Cersei Lannister, stand accused of countless crimes. You used wildfire against your enemies. You orchestrated the faith militants' purges and then turned on them. You have tormented the houses of the realm for your own gain. The blood on your hands is well known. Cersei glared. The city despised you once, when you were nothing but a name across the sea. You think they love you now? You are a fool if you think the lords will bow to a Targaryen girl with 3 freakish lizards. They will rise against you and you will die screaming like your father. Silence. The word struck the hall like a whip crack. Daenerys felt fire burn in her lungs. She reined it in. She would not be goaded into fury. You will have a trial, Cersei Lannister. If you are found guilty, you will face the penalty. If you wish to choose trial by combat, I fear your champion is already dead. Perhaps you will have better luck with the 7 judges. Either way, your time of terror is done. Cersei's lips peeled back in a silent snarl. The guards dragged her away and Daenerys forced herself not to watch her go. Hatred would fester if she let it. She was not the Mad King's daughter in that sense. That left a handful of Goldcloak officers and Pycelle. Daenerys dismissed the lesser men with a directive to swear new oaths of fealty or face dismissal. As for Pycelle, he tottered forward, mouth flapping. Your Grace, have mercy on an old man. I served the crown for decades. I served your father, though he was not always the gentlest of men. Still, I can put my knowledge to good use, yes. I have potions, learning. Daenerys inclined her head. You will be confined for now. The Citadel may send a new Grand Maester if they see fit. As for you, old man, you shall answer for your part in the Lannisters' reign. Whether mercy or justice prevails depends on your cooperation. Pycelle hobbled away, aided by 2 Unsullied who did not appear sympathetic. Daenerys took a slow breath. That concluded the formalities of the morning, but 1,000 more tasks loomed. She needed to summon the lords of the Crownlands to re-establish the king's queen's peace. She needed to secure the roads. She needed to appoint a hand of the queen to handle the day-to-day governance while she set her sights on unifying the rest of Westeros. Her eyes drifted over the crowd, looking for a sign of Tyrion Lannister. He was absent, likely in some corner of the keep, under guard. She would speak to him later. For the moment, Daenerys beckoned Barristan and Jorah to her side. We must reach out to the Reach to Highgarden. The Tyrells have a strong position, farmland, and resources. If they accept me as queen, the realm will have a bountiful source of food. If they stand against me, we risk another war. Barristan stroked his chin. Traditionally, the Tyrells supported the Lannisters, but that was largely due to Marjorie's marriage alliances. With Joffrey dead and Tommen captured, there's little reason for them to remain loyal to House Lannister. Lady Olenna Tyrell is known for her sharp mind and sharper tongue. If you approach her with an offer of alliance, she may accept rather than risk the dragon's wrath. Jorah nodded. I agree, Your Grace. The Tyrell forces are still formidable, though, so approach carefully. A raven might not suffice. Perhaps a trusted envoy. Or you could ride there yourself, though leaving King's Landing so soon after taking it might be unwise. Daenerys set her jaw. I will not abandon the city to chaos, not yet. I need a messenger who can speak for me convincingly. Barristan and Jorah exchanged a glance. The Sandai watched quietly, taking mental note. Daenerys tapped a finger on the metal armrest of the throne. Perhaps Ser Barristan, if he's willing. The Tyrells know him as a knight of great repute. They might listen to him. But I also need his counsel here. Barristan bowed. I will do as you command, Your Grace. If you prefer I remain, I can suggest another loyal knight who might serve as envoy. One the Tyrells would respect. Daenerys paused, considering. Then her thoughts flicked to another region, the north. The rumors of the Boltons holding Winterfell, the possibility that a Stark survived. The Starks had once been loyal to the Targaryens until her father's madness and Rhaegar's tragedy. Even now, the North was said to seethe over the atrocities inflicted by House Bolton. And the North, she said aloud, we have heard only scattered tales. If the Boltons have truly usurped the Stark seat, the Northern Lords might be sympathetic to me if I promise to rid them of the Boltons. But I risk a new war if I ignore them. Jorah cleared his throat. Your Grace, I hail from Bear Island in the north. My father was Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. I know something of Northern ways. They are proud, stubborn, and weary of Southern meddling. But if you offer them justice, if you can show them you are not your father nor a foreign despot, they may rally to you. They have known betrayal from the Iron Throne for too long. Daenerys considered him. Then I will rely on your insight, Ser Jorah. But one thread at a time. First, we must secure the Crownlands and the Reach. After that, we look north. The Vale, too, remains important, though I've heard it's been quiet, withdrawn behind its mountains under the watch of Lord Baelish. We will see if that quiet persists. Ser Barristan folded his hands behind his back. Your Grace, we must also consider the Ironborn. They are ever restless, and with the realm in turmoil, they may seize the opportunity to raid the coasts. If we do not show strength, they will exploit weakness. Daenerys gave a slow nod, remembering vaguely the salt-soaked men who had once crowned their own king during the War of the Five Kings. The Iron Islands. One more piece in a puzzle that seems endless. She sighed. Very well. For now, let us write to Lady Olenna Tyrell, to Prince Doran Martell, and to the Lords Paramount of the Vale and Stormlands, if they can be found. Let us proclaim that a new queen sits the Iron Throne and invite them to treat with me. Missandei moved forward, pen and paper in hand. I will compose the letters, Your Grace. Shall I title you as Queen of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Protector of the Realm, Breaker of Chains? Daenerys lifted a hand. Yes, the full titles, but keep the message concise. Let them see that I am willing to negotiate, but not to beg. She paused, recalling the politics of Slavers Bay. She had learned harsh lessons there, that toppling a tyrant was simpler than building a new order. Yet she had done it more or less, and now she had to do the same in Westeros. The faith, the nobility, the small folk, she must balance them all, or risk the realm sliding back into chaos. A bustle at the throne room doors caught her attention. Tyrion Lannister entered under guard, wearing fresh clothes of modest cut, his expression thoughtful. He bowed with flourish. My queen, I do hope I'm not intruding. Your guards insisted on escorting me. Daenerys regarded him. You come unbidden. I hope you bring something worth hearing. Tyrion smiled faintly. I usually do. News travels fast even within these walls. I've heard you plan to send envoys to the great houses and that you've taken Cersei captive. You might be wondering if my knowledge of those houses could aid you or if you'd rather toss me in a cell. Daenerys studied him from the throne. Which do you propose I choose? He spread his hands. I propose you let me speak. I know the Tyrells intimately. They were our allies, after all, and I spent many a feast with Mace Tyrell's boisterous brood. I can offer insight into negotiating with Lady Olenna, who is the real power in that family. I also have knowledge of the Vale, the Riverlands, and the petty ambitions of the minor lords who swirl around the edges of power. And yes, I have no love left for my sister or father. My father I killed personally, as you may have heard. My sister tried to have me executed for Joffrey's murder, a crime I did not commit. As far as loyalty to House Lannister goes, I believe you'll find me lacking. Daenerys felt a flicker of wry amusement, though she kept her features composed. You are a dangerous man, Tyrion Lannister. Smart, cunning, with a silver tongue. Why should I trust you? Tyrion gave a rueful laugh. You should not blindly. But consider this, I have no future if I return to Casterly Rock. My father was fond of reminding me that I was a stain on the family name. My sister, well, you can see how she turned out. My brother Jaime, last I heard, was off in the Riverlands or the Westerlands, dealing with the aftermath of war. He might even be dead. I have nowhere to go but forward, and I believe you offer the best chance for a stable realm. Because one thing I do desire, my queen, is a realm that's not constantly at war, where someone like me might have a place, if he proves useful. He paused, letting silence deepen. When Daenerys did not speak, he added, If you'll have me, I would serve as your advisor. Perhaps even your hand if you see fit. I know the Game of Thrones far better than most. I have survived it this long. Daenerys looked at Barristan, who wore a guarded expression. She glanced at Jorah, who looked openly distrustful. Then she turned her gaze back to Tyrion. I have heard you are a shrewd man, Lord Tyrion, and cunning enough to survive the worst that has been thrown at you. But loyalty is not proven with words alone. If I name you my advisor, you will be bound to me by oath. Should you betray me, I will have your head. Are we clear?" Tyrion bowed deeply. "Crystal clear, your grace." She let the hush linger, her eyes sweeping over the assembled watchers. Then she spoke, voice carrying, "I name Tyrion Lannister as my advisor, to counsel me in the politics of this realm. He is to be obeyed unless his orders conflict with my own. He stands outside the line of succession and has no claim on the throne. Do you accept these terms, Tyrion of House Lannister?" He bowed again. "I do, your grace, and I thank you." A ripple of murmurs passed through the onlookers. Some scowled, others seemed relieved. Daenerys felt a tightness in her chest. She was trusting a Lannister, but she had learned that forging a new world meant taking risks, forging alliances that seemed impossible. She had once freed a man called Dario Naharis from his contract and taken him as an ally. She had once welcomed Barristan Selmy into her service after he revealed his true identity. Why should Tyrion Lannister be any different, so long as he served faithfully? Tyrion stepped to the side, leaning on his cane, eyes gleaming with curiosity as he surveyed the hall from a new vantage point. Daenerys rose from the throne. "We will speak further in private," she told him. Then, turning to her retinue, she added, "Ser Jorah, Ser Barristan Missandei, let us convene in the Solar. We have many letters to send and decisions to make." She swept from the throne room, her new council trailing behind. The corridors of the Red Keep felt strangely familiar now, though she had never walked them before this conquest. Had her ancestors felt this same hush, this same sense of destiny pressing upon them, when they first claimed these halls centuries ago? She could almost imagine the ghosts of Aegon the Conqueror, of Maegor the Cruel, of Rhaenys and Visenya. But she was not any of them. She was Daenerys Stormborn, and she would shape her own fate. They reached the Solar, a spacious chamber with tall windows overlooking the bay. Sunlight glinted on the water, and a fresh breeze wafted in, stirring Daenerys's silver-gold hair. The table there was large, cluttered with remnants of the Lannisters' administration, half-finished scrolls, maps pinned with small lion tokens, a few morsels of stale bread from a neglected meal. Missandei cleared a space, setting out blank parchment. Daenerys took a seat at the head of the table, motioning for Tyrion, Jorah, Barristan, and Missandei to sit as well. Grey Worm stood guard near the door, ever silent. "We have no time to lose," she began. "The sooner we secure alliances, the sooner we can restore peace. Tyrion, you claim to know the Tyrells. Advise me." Tyrion nodded, folding his hands on the table. "Lady Olenna Tyrell, known as the Queen of Thorns, is the real power in Highgarden. She's elderly but razor-sharp. Her son, Mace Tyrell, is a pompous fool with a love of parades and feasts. Her granddaughter Margaery was married to Joffrey, then to Tommen. The question is whether Margaery remains in King's Landing or if she returned to Highgarden. Do you have word of her whereabouts?" Daenerys turned to Missandei. The young woman shook her head. "We have no information about Lady Margaery's current location, your grace. She may have fled. She was apparently in the Red Keep at some point, but no one has seen her since your forces broke through the city gates." Tyrion frowned. She might have escaped during the chaos or else is hiding within the city. The Tyrell bannermen are numerous and they produce most of the grain and livestock for the southern half of Westeros. If you can secure their loyalty, you'll have a crucial advantage. If they choose to resist, they can cause untold havoc by starving the capital. My guess is that Lady Olenna will see which way the wind blows. If she believes your reign will last, she'll throw her support behind you." Daenerys nodded. "I want to avoid famine or more war if I can. So we will write to Lady Olenna inviting her to King's Landing to negotiate a formal alliance. I will assure her that no harm will come to her here. Tyrion, you will help draft the letter." He inclined his head. "As you wish. I'll add a few personal touches to convey sincerity. Perhaps mention how the Lannisters failed to protect Margaery in the end and that you value House Tyrell as an integral part of the realm." Daenerys accepted that with a small gesture. "Good. Then there's Dorne. Prince Doran has given me partial support, enough for Oberyn to fight by my side. But we need a formal alliance with Sunspear as well. I promised Oberyn that I would see Dorne's demands heard once I took the throne. Missandei composed a letter to Prince Doran, reaffirming my gratitude and stating my willingness to confirm Dorne's status as a largely autonomous kingdom within the realm if that is his desire. Missandei nodded, quill already scratching on parchment. Barristan clasped his hands together. And for the veil, your grace? Tyrion answered, the veil is nominally ruled by young Lord Robin Arryn, but the true power is Petyr Baelish Littlefinger. He's cunning, manipulative, and not to be trusted. He's known to switch sides if it benefits him. But he's also not a man of open warfare unless he's sure he can win. If you want him on your side, you need to either bribe him with something he wants or show him that opposing you would be suicidal. Daenerys' lips tightened. I do not like dealing with men who treat loyalty as a game. Still, we cannot leave the veil at our backs if we hope to unify the realm. I will send an offer of alliance. If Baelish refuses, we'll deal with him another way. Tyrion gestured to the map. That leaves the Riverlands, which are in chaos. House Tully was nearly wiped out. Catelyn Stark's brother, Edmure, was taken prisoner by the Freys. House Frey is hated for the Red Wedding, but they still hold the twins a strategic crossing over the Green Fork. Jaime Lannister was negotiating with them on behalf of the crown, last I knew. With Jaime gone or missing, and with the Lannisters in disarray, the Freys may try to hold the Riverlands themselves. Or the Blackfish, Brynden Tully, might be out there raising rebels. Daenerys leaned over the map, noting the swirling lines of rivers and roads. So the Riverlands is a battleground of broken loyalties. If I can liberate it from the Freys, perhaps the small folk there would welcome me. But that is another campaign altogether. Ser Jorah spoke up, voice low. And then there is the north, your grace. It is far away, but eventually you must address it. The Boltons hold Winterfell, or so the rumors say. The Stark heirs are scattered or dead, save for one or two that might still draw breath. The Northerners are proud and they will not bend easily, but they may accept you if you rid them of the Boltons. Then again, rumor also claims that Stannis Baratheon marched north to help them, or perhaps to claim the north for himself. His fate is unknown. The wild rumors of White Walkers and undead in the far north also persist. But no one in the south truly believes them. Daenerys recalled the half-remembered dream from her fitful sleep, that vision of an icy, monstrous threat. She had heard scattered tales of the Night's Watch and an ancient terror stirring beyond the wall, but it felt more like legend than reality. Yet something gnawed at her whenever she recalled it. She took a breath. One war at a time. Let us strengthen our hold here in the south. If the threat in the north is real, we will face it. If it is a myth, then we will discover that in time. She addressed Missandei again. Write to the lords of the north as well, offering them recognition of their hardships. Promise that if they bend the knee, I will restore justice and oust any who wronged them. But until we settle things in the south, I cannot march north immediately. Yes, your grace, Missandei said, scribbling furiously. Daenerys sat back, exhaling. We must also consider a coronation. Ser Barristan, you suggested it. If the people see me crowned, it may solidify my claim in their minds. Barristan inclined his head. Indeed, your grace. A coronation in the Great September of Baelor was once tradition, but that sept was destroyed by wildfire, by Cersei's hand, if the rumors are true. There is a smaller sept near the Dragonette, or you could hold a public ceremony in the ruins of the Great September to show you are reclaiming it. Either way, a formal anointing by the faith might persuade many to accept you as queen, but the faith has been decimated by the same wildfire. The High Sparrow is dead and the faith militant scattered. Tyrion snorted. Yes, my darling sister took care of that. The city is without a formal High Septon. The faith is leaderless, though smaller septs still function. If you want a grand, solemn affair, you might need to wait until the faith reorganizes. If you want a quick statement to the city, you can have any septon crown you. The name matters less than the spectacle. Daenerys pressed her lips together. I would prefer to respect tradition, but perhaps a grand spectacle can wait. My father was crowned in the Great September. I cannot replicate that now. Perhaps I shall do it in the courtyard of the Red Keep, open to the public. The faith can send a septon. We hold a simple ceremony to show the realm that a new queen has truly ascended. Later, once the faith is restored, I can have a more formal anointing if needed. Practical, Tyrion said with a nod. And safer. Less chance of an ambush in a wide courtyard controlled by your Unsullied. She glanced at Jorah. Make the arrangements. Let the city know 3 days from now the queen will be crowned in the Red Keep's yard. The gates will be open to all who wish to witness, though we will keep a watchful eye for saboteurs. Jorah rose, pressing a fist to his chest. Yes, your grace. That settled, Daenerys stood. The men and Missandei followed suit, waiting on her next words. She let her gaze drift to the open window, to the bright sky. She felt her blood quicken, recalling the rush of flight on Drogon's back. So much of her life had been driven by the dream of returning to Westeros. Now she was here on the cusp of forging a new era. Yet she felt the press of responsibilities from all sides, the looming challenges that threatened to overwhelm any single person. She steeled herself. "We have our tasks," she said. "We will send these letters, prepare for a coronation, and strengthen our hold. Let it be known. The Targaryen dynasty has returned, but it will be a dynasty of justice, not madness. I will not hide within these walls. If challenges rise, I will meet them. We will not make war on small folk, nor shall we allow rebels to tear the realm apart again." They all inclined their heads in agreement. She dismissed them, letting them scatter to their duties. Tyrion lingered for a moment, gaze flicking around the solar. He offered her a half-smile, then turned to go, the gentle tapping of his cane fading down the corridor. Alone for a moment, Daenerys stepped to the window and braced her hands on the sill. Wind ruffled her hair. She looked out over King's Landing, the city she had seized with swift ferocity. Smoke still drifted from a few places, but the fires were dying. The battered gates were under repair. Ships bobbed in the harbor, some bearing Pentoshi flags, others mere trading vessels. Out there, in the wide realm, lords would soon hear the news. The Dragon Queen had taken King's Landing. Some would curse it, some would rejoice, some would scheme. A shape passed overhead. Drogon, shadow flickering on the rooftops. She felt his presence like a reassuring warmth in her bones. For so long, it had been her dragons, and a scattering of loyal friends against a vast world. Now that world was in her hands, for better or worse. She shut her eyes, inhaling. Soon, she would need to hold court, hear petitions, settle disputes. The work of ruling had begun in earnest. No one had taught her how to be a queen beyond the brutality of conquering or the cruelty of slavery's overseers. She had taught herself, shaped her destiny with each choice. And now she stood at the heart of Westeros, forging a new future. Resting her hand on the stone, she let her mind drift for a moment. She thought of the foreign shadows swirling beyond the wall, whispers of the White Walkers, the undead. She remembered the red waste's scorching emptiness, the illusions of the House of the Undying, the roars of slaves she had freed chanting her name in Astapor and Yunkai. She had carried all those memories here, to the seat of Targaryen power. She opened her eyes. Far below, she saw small folk moving like ants in the streets, occasionally glancing up at the circling dragons. She remembered the child in the square, who had asked if she was truly the Dragon Queen. She had said yes. Now, she intended to prove what that meant. Not fear alone, but also protection, justice, and rebirth. The day would be long and the years longer still. She would face betrayal, opposition, possibly war from multiple fronts. But for now, she was Daenerys Storborn, seated upon the Iron Throne, and she was determined to blaze a new trail. The realm would learn what it meant to have a queen who had walked through fire and emerged unburned. She pushed off from the window and left the solar to begin the day's labor. She would visit Drogon in the courtyard, perhaps stroke his scales, let him know she was safe. Then she would meet with the city's interim captains of trade, begin dispensing justice to those who came seeking it. Step by step, she would reshape King's Landing into something better than what she had inherited. And then, in time, she would extend that transformation across the 7 kingdoms. 3 days later, as planned, the coronation day dawned bright and cloudless. A light breeze carried the scents of the city, a mix of cooking fires, fish from the harbor, and the acrid tang of old soot. By midday, a sizable crowd had gathered in the expansive courtyard of the Red Keep. The battered gates stood open with unsullied and disciplined ranks to maintain order and to inspect anyone who entered. Above, on the ramparts, Dornish spearmen patrolled side by side with members of the newly organized City Watch, no longer wearing the lion and crown sigil, but a temporary emblem that simply indicated they served the queen. A simple wooden platform had been raised at the center of the courtyard, framed by tall torches that flickered in the daylight. Draped over the platform were black and red banners of House Targaryen, brand new and stitched by the city's seamstresses in a rush of frantic work. The same symbol flew atop the highest towers where once the lion and stag had flapped. Daenerys prepared herself in a chamber near the courtyard. Missandei helped her don a gown of silver fabric that caught the sunlight in shimmering waves reminiscent of her hair. Over it, she wore a cloak of black edged with red trim, the Targaryen sigil embroidered at the clasp. On her feet, soft leather slippers dyed a dark crimson. She had chosen to wear no crown yet. One would be placed upon her head as part of the ceremony. At her side stood Ser Barristan, resplendent in white cloak and polished armor, the last surviving king guard of her father's reign, now committed to her. Ser Jorah was there too, clad in simpler plate but carrying himself with quiet pride. Tyrion lingered near the door, fussing with a small jar of wine. Missandei finished adjusting the cloak. Daenerys glanced at them. "Is everything in readiness?" Tyrion nodded. "The crowd is sizable. Many are curious. Some are no doubt Lannister sympathizers, but the threat of dragons keeps them from protesting too loudly. Most of the small folk merely want peace and bread. We've given them reason to hope for both." Barristan cleared his throat. "A septon stands ready. Not the high septon, none such exists right now, but a respected figure from one of the lesser septs who has survived the purges. He is prepared to anoint you in the name of the seven, should you wish a blessing." Daenerys breathed in slowly. She had never been particularly devout in the ways of the Seven or of the Red God. She had seen too much of gods and magic to place her faith blindly. Still, tradition held power over the realm. "Yes, let him do it," she said quietly. "We stand on ceremony for the sake of those who need it." Missandei laid a comforting hand on Daenerys' arm. "They will see your strength and your compassion, your grace. They will hail you as queen." Daenerys smiled at her, grateful. Then she drew herself up and said, "Let us not delay further." They stepped out into the midday sun, the warmth caressing Daenerys' face. She could feel her pulse flutter, her stomach tight with anticipation. But she kept her features composed, regal. The Unsullied bowed as she passed, forming a corridor leading to the platform. The Dornish spearmen lowered their spears in salute. People pressed close on either side, held back by rope lines, women clutching children, men in patched cloaks, a scattering of lesser nobles who had scurried to pledge their loyalty. Daenerys ascended the platform. Before her lay a wooden table on which rested a simple crowned silver with 3 small dragons twisting around its rim. It was newly forged by the city smiths, designed to evoke the memory of the Targaryen kings of old. Beside it stood the septon, an elderly man with a bald pate and watery eyes. He clasped his hands over his front, trembling slightly in the presence of so many armed men, not to mention the looming shapes of dragons overhead. For indeed, Drogon, Regal, and Viserion circled above the Red Keep, shadows flicking across the courtyard. Now and then they let out triumphant roars, but they seemed to sense that this gathering was not a battle. Silence spread as Daenerys turned to face the crowd. She could feel thousands of eyes on her. The septon raised his hands. "Behold Daenerys of House Targaryen, the first of her name," he began, voice wavering but clear. "She comes before the seven in humility to be crowned as Queen of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, protector of the 7 kingdoms, breaker of chains, mother of dragons." He took a small vial of oil and anointed Daenerys' forehead with a trembling finger. "In the light of the Father may she be just. In the light of the Mother may she be merciful. In the light of the warrior may she be brave. In the light of the crone may she be wise. In the light of the maiden may she be pure. In the light of the smith may she be diligent. In the light of the stranger may she accept the unknown." Daenerys let the oil drip down her brow, cool and fragrant. She bowed her head slightly. The septon took the crown, lifted it with both hands. "I crown you Daenerys Stormborn, Queen of the 7 Kingdoms." He set the silver circlet gently upon her head. It was lighter than she had expected. She exhaled, letting a moment pass in which she felt the hush, the weight of centuries resting on her shoulders. Then she turned to face the gathered crowd, lifting her hands. "People of King's Landing," she called, voice resonating. "You have seen war and bloodshed. I promise you now, I will strive to bring you peace, to end the cycle of violence that has plagued our realm. Together, we will build a new future, one where justice prevails and no child grows up in fear of the flames of war." A wave of sound washed through the courtyard, uncertain muttering, some cheering, some applause. Daenerys spotted a few individuals dropping to their knees, others cheering more loudly. The tension in the air felt charged, as though the city itself was drawing a collective breath. Then, from high above, Drogon roared. Regal and Viserion joined him, the cacophony echoing off the red walls of the keep. It was a sound that filled the courtyard, making the heart pound. And somehow in that moment, many in the crowd began to cheer in earnest, as though the dragon's roar had broken a dam of fear and allowed awe or hope to flood in. Daenerys stood tall, letting the cheers swirl around her. She was queen now in name and in truth, crowned beneath the open sky. She had claimed the seat her ancestors forged. She had sworn to usher in a kinder reign, yet she carried the memory of all the injustice that had come before. She would have to be strong enough to keep her vow. Her mind turned to the realm beyond the city gates, to the swirling uncertainties in the Reach, the Vale, the North. To the unstoppable flow of time that would bring new dangers, perhaps from the Ironborn, perhaps from beyond the Wall. But for now, she tasted the triumph she had earned through fire, struggle, and unyielding will. She was Daenerys Stormborn, crowned by the light of day, dragons roaring her ascension to the heavens. That night, the city glimmered with torchlight and lanterns. Many small folk held impromptu celebrations, partly out of relief that the city hadn't been sacked more brutally, partly out of cautious hope that a new era might be kindred to them. The Red Keep was abuzz with small feasts, though Daenerys kept any official banquet modest. She did not want to spend the city's limited resources on lavish displays while so many still lacked enough to eat. She wandered the halls, her silver gown replaced with a simpler black robe, the crown set aside in her chambers. Tyrion found her near a window overlooking the torchlit city. He sipped from a wine cup, offered her one, which she politely declined. He quirked his brow. "I have to say, Your Grace, you wear a crown with more dignity than most I've seen." Not that the bar was terribly high after Joffrey. Daenerys stared out at the dark shapes of buildings. This city has been battered by war, by the cruelty of kings and queens. If I cannot do better, I am unworthy of the crown. Tyrion took a thoughtful sip. I wonder if your father ever had such moments of introspection. I suspect not. She glanced at him. You speak freely. He bowed with exaggerated flourish, nearly spilling his wine. Only in private, if you permit it. My father used to say that the king who listens only to flatterers soon finds himself undone. I imagine the same is true for a queen. Daenerys allowed herself a small smile. It is. Very well, Tyrion. Speak your mind freely when we are in private council. In public, you will show me the respect due a queen. But of course. He tilted his head. Then allow me to speak plainly. You are in a precarious position. The Lannister name is tarnished but not destroyed. There are still loyalists out there, men who might rally behind Jaime if he resurfaces, or behind Kevin Lannister, or any other branch of the family. The Tyrells might join you unless they sense weakness. Dorne is half in your pocket, half suspicious. The North is a mystery, and you have named me a Lannister as your advisor. Some might see that as a sign of folly. Daenerys folded her arms. I am aware of the risks. Why do you suppose I accepted them? Tyrion shrugged. Because you need someone who can pick apart the schemes that swirl in the shadows. Because you know that even with dragons, you cannot hold 7 kingdoms by sheer intimidation alone, and you have to play the game. Perhaps because you see in me a man who has nowhere else to turn and so must cling to you. Or maybe you have a sentimental fondness for clever dwarfs, I won't rule it out. A flicker of amusement crossed her face. Yes to all of that. And perhaps because I want to show the realm that I can make even those who were once my enemies into allies if they have the sense to serve the greater good. He lifted his wine in salute. Then let's hope we succeed, Your Grace. I would hate to be devoured by a dragon merely because the Freys or some other upstarts managed to undercut us. She turned away from the window, walking down the corridor. Tyrion followed, dwarfed by her guards. She paused at a heavy door that led to one of the keep's lesser balconies. Beyond it lay the nighttime sky, a scattering of stars above. She stepped onto the balcony, bracing her hands on the rail. Far below, in an open courtyard, she spotted Drogon curled up, asleep, with Rhaegal and Viserion near him. They looked like dark lumps of scaled muscle, but she could hear their low rumbling breaths. Sometimes I envy them, she murmured. They know no doubts. They only know that they are dragons and the sky is theirs. Tyrion's voice was soft. They also know hunger and the desire to hunt. Men fear them or worship them, but do they truly understand them? I doubt it. Perhaps that is why they love you. You hatched them from stone, you led them out of bondage. They see you as a parent. That is more loyalty than many kings ever achieve from their subjects. She watched Drogon shift, a wing rustling. I love them too. But I must be more than the mother of dragons if I am to rule well. Dragons can burn armies, but they cannot heal a broken realm. He stood by her, gazing downward. True enough. Then again, if you lack the ability to burn armies at need, you might never get the chance to do any healing. The realm can be unforgiving. She acknowledged the point with a somber nod. A swirl of night air tousled her hair. Tyrion, do you believe the White Walkers are real? He hesitated. I've heard tales from the Wall. Benjen Stark vanished, men have claimed to see creatures in the snows. But my father dismissed such stories as nonsense. Still, there is a certain persistence to the rumors, is there not? The wildlings have been fleeing south, or so I hear, and the Night's Watch is said to be battered, short on men. Could it be real? Perhaps. If so, the realm's petty squabbles won't matter if an army of the dead comes marching south. Daenerys felt a chill prickle her skin. I keep remembering a vision from my time in the House of the Undying. A vision of the wall crumbling beneath an endless night. I do not know if it was prophecy or mere illusion, but the thought lingers. Tyrion glanced at her. I suspect we should focus on uniting the realm first. We cannot march north to fight an enemy that half the lords refuse to believe in. But if, by chance, the stories are true, you might find yourself fighting a war unlike any Westeros has seen since the dawn of days. Perhaps the dragons will be your greatest asset. She exhaled, her breath visible in the cool night. Then we must move swiftly. I will not let the realm be devoured by an ancient menace while we squabble over crowns. They stood in silence for a while, gazing down at the sleeping dragons, the flickers of torchlight on the red keep's high walls. Then Daenerys said, "Tomorrow I will hear from the various lords and knights who swear fealty, or at least claim they do. I want you by my side to point out who might be lying or who might be dangerous. Use that cunning of yours." He gave a small bow. "Gladly. Reading men's faces is one of my few talents. The others being drinking and, well, more drinking." She offered him a faint smile. "I trust you'll be sober enough to assist." He shrugged playfully. "For you, my queen, I'll manage. Though I'll not refuse a cup or two." Daenerys turned from the balcony, heading back inside. "A cup or two will be your limit, then?" He chuckled, following her. Harsh but fair. They made their way through the lamplit corridors. The Red Keep's tapestry-shrouded walls whispered of ancient secrets. Daenerys found her way to her temporary bedchamber, an ornate room once used by a Lannister lady-in-waiting. The door was guarded by Unsullied, who stepped aside at her approach. Before she entered, Tyrion paused. "Rest well, your grace. Tomorrow is a new day, your first full day as a crowned queen of Westeros." She looked at him, her silver hair catching the torchlight. "Yes," she said. "Let it be a good one." Inside, she undressed with Missandei's help, donning a lighter shift suitable for sleep. Her mind churned with a dozen matters of state, but she forced them aside long enough to close her eyes. In the darkness, she let her breathing steady, imagining the dragons above her, their warmth radiating through the stone. She was queen, and the realm's burdens were now truly hers. When morning came, it brought a swirl of new arrivals. A line of minor lords stretched through the throne room, each eager to bend the knee or at least see the new queen. Daenerys sat upon the Iron Throne, wearing her crown and a flowing black gown. Missandei stood at her right, reading names from a list. Tyrion hovered near the base of the throne's dais, quietly noting each petitioner's manner. Yora and Barristan flanked Daenerys, watchful for threats. Some lords pledged themselves wholeheartedly, swearing they had secretly loathed the Lannisters. Daenerys accepted their oaths, though she wondered how many simply sought favor now that the winds had changed. Some arrived with modest gifts, coin, embroidered cloth, even a new sword or two. She thanked them, refusing to appear greedy. She needed these men to see that her reign was not about plunder. A few arrived with grudging compliance, bowing stiffly and offering half-hearted words. Tyrion made a small note each time, and Daenerys recognized that these might be the seeds of future rebellions if left unchecked. But she outwardly welcomed them, thinking it better to appear magnanimous. As noon approached, a hush rippled through the hall. A minor functionary announced the arrival of Margaery Tyrell. The young woman swept in, dressed in a gown of pale green. Her hair was carefully arranged in loose curls. Her face wore a calm, composed expression, though Daenerys saw the tension in her posture. She was flanked by 2 ladies-in-waiting and 4 Tyrell guards who had surrendered their weapons upon entering the keep. Margaery approached the throne, dropping into a graceful curtsy. "Your Grace, allow me to congratulate you on your coronation. I regret I could not attend yesterday's ceremony. I was indisposed." Daenerys nodded slowly. "Lady Margaery, I understand you were once queen consort to Tommen Baratheon. Now that Tommen's claim is forfeit, where do your loyalties lie?" Margaery looked up, her eyes luminous. "I serve House Tyrell, your Grace. And House Tyrell, I believe, seeks peace and prosperity for the realm. My grandmother, Lady Olenna, has returned to Highgarden. She awaits word from you." Daenerys studied her face. The lines were soft, sympathetic. She had heard that Margaery was adept at winning the hearts of the people, a skilled player of the game. "And you remain in King's Landing. Why?" Margaery's lips curved in a polite smile. "I could not risk traveling alone through war-torn roads, not without a proper escort. And I wish to see what kind of queen you would be, your Grace. The city is grateful that you spared it from total destruction." Tyrion cleared his throat softly. "I can attest that Lady Margaery has a knack for diplomacy. She may be of use in bridging any gaps between the crown and House Tyrell." Marjorie offered Tyrion a courteous nod. My lord, we have been on opposite sides in the past, but I hold no grudges. The realm changes quickly. Daenerys drummed her fingers on the throne's metal arm. Very well. If you wish to remain in the city, Lady Marjorie, you will be treated with respect as befits a daughter of House Tyrell. But understand that your movements will be observed. I cannot have you plotting with Lannister loyalists. Marjorie bowed her head. I understand, Your Grace. I have no interest in Lannister intrigues. If it pleases you, I would like to write to my grandmother, urging her to come to an arrangement with you. There need be no further bloodshed between our houses. Daenerys nodded. That would please me greatly. Very well. Missandei will arrange a secure chamber for you. You may have your ladies with you, but your soldiers will remain outside the keep, unarmed, or they may return to Highgarden under safe conduct if you prefer. Marjorie let out a small breath, seemingly relieved. I thank you for your courtesy, Your Grace. She dropped another curtsy, then rose and backed away. The guards escorted her out, leaving Daenerys to wonder if she had made a wise choice allowing the famously charming Tyrell lady to linger in King's Landing. Yet it might signal goodwill to House Tyrell and expedite an alliance. The day continued in a similar fashion, a procession of faces and fealties. By the end, Daenerys felt drained, her mind buzzing with the complexities of each sworn sword and minor knight who might or might not keep their vow. She returned to the Solar to find letters from the Stormlands, from various lords who had at first been uncertain. Now, having seen the city fall without massive slaughter, they expressed cautious support. Others insisted they would bend the knee if guaranteed certain privileges. While Missandei sorted through them, Daenerys wandered to the balcony. High above, the sky was turning golden in the late afternoon. Drogon glided in a lazy arc over the city, Regal and Viserion close behind. The sun caught their scales, turning them into living jewels. Despite her weariness, Daenerys smiled, awed by their grace. Behind her, Tyrion approached, holding a scroll. A raven from Highgarden, he said. Lady Olenna acknowledges your letter. She says she will consider your invitation to visit King's Landing, but she demands certain assurances for her safety. She also suggests that if you truly wish to prove your good intentions, you'll show leniency toward Marjorie, even restore certain lands and incomes that were seized under the Lannisters. In return, House Tyrell would commit its full strength to your reign. Should you refuse, she implies, they might close off their food supplies and see how well the city fares. Daenerys felt a flicker of irritation. She would starve King's Landing into submission? Does she not realize that my dragons can burn Highgarden if I so choose? Tyrion sighed. She likely does. But Lady Olenna knows the game well. She's testing your resolve. If she believes you rash, she'll call your bluff. If she believes you wise, she'll negotiate. My guess is she wants to see if you'll be another Cersei or something new. Daenerys gazed at the dragons overhead, letting the sight calm her. I do not wish to slaughter the Tyrells. Very well. Draft a response that addresses her concerns. Promise her safe passage and a seat on my council to speak for the Reach if she will come in peace. If she refuses, I'll consider other means. But I will not let the city starve because of her pride. Tyrion nodded, making a small note on the scroll. You see? Already you've proven more reasonable than my dear sister, who would likely have tried to have Lady Olenna assassinated by now. She shot him a wry look. I'll leave that approach to others. I prefer not to start my reign with a wave of poisonings and murders. As Tyrion turned to go, Daenerys called after him and Tyrion. You served as Master of Coin once, did you not? I need you to examine the crown's finances. Tell me how badly in debt we are. He paused in the doorway. That enough that you'll cringe, I suspect. The Lannisters like to claim wealth, but they borrowed heavily from the Iron Bank of Bravos, and the crown's coffers have been used for war after war. I'll gather the ledgers and let you know the damage soon. Daenerys sighed. It seems the work never ends. He gave a half grin. That is why we keep counsel, Your Grace. Rest if you can. He departed, leaving Daenerys alone on the balcony. She stayed there a long while, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson that echoed the Targaryen banners. In the city below, small folk milled in the streets with new caution, but there was less panic now. She could see flickers of normal life returning, vendors hawking their wares, children chasing each other through alleys. The scars of war would not heal quickly, but at least the city was not in flames. She rested her hands on the stone balustrade. In her mind, she saw a vision of a united realm, freed from the vicious cycles of conflict. She imagined a world where the small folk were not ground beneath the Lord's boots, where her dragons soared not as instruments of terror, but as symbols of the Queen's power to protect. Yet she knew the path there was fraught. The Tyrells needed placating. Dorne needed a formal treaty. The north loomed with its own troubles. The Vale and the Riverlands were uncertain. The Iron Islands threatened chaos. And beyond it all, winter crept ever closer, with rumors of a doom rising in the far north. Drawing in a slow breath, Daenerys Targaryen steeled herself. She had come to Westeros earlier than anyone expected, seized King's Landing in a single decisive campaign, dethroned the Lannisters in a blaze of dragon fire. But the true test of her rule was only beginning. She prayed she had the strength and the wisdom to be the queen these 7 kingdoms needed. Lifting her gaze, she watched Drogon bank low over the city walls, his roar echoing across the rooftops. She did not flinch, she felt his presence in her blood. "I am the blood of the dragon," she whispered, "and I will not fail." The last rays of sunlight cast her shadow across the balcony, tall and slim, crowned with silver. Night descended on King's Landing, but Daenerys Stormborn stood ready, eyes on the horizon, heart resolute. A new dawn would follow, and she intended to lead the realm into its light, no matter how dark the road might become before then.